Hello and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doovid. I'm your host, Jen, COE. Nice to be here, and we've got a great slate of things to talk about this evening. Really looking forward to it. Thanks for joining us this evening. Doovid, I'll hand it over to you for the introductions and your Week in Review.
Okay, yeah, great. Good to be back. Just share this on social media, and we'll get started. Yeah, so it was a great week this week. Nothing super special, but thanks to Jennifer's encouragement, I wrote my article on the precursors to the multiple truth hypothesis. So it's not even really like the multiple truth hypothesis yet, but it's getting there, and I could see how. I think I'll be able to keep on writing another article every week, and within a year at that rate, I should be able to have a book and help clarify my thoughts. So let me, okay, show them done. So let me get some of the stuff off my desk. So here is my article on. Wow, it's even too long to fit, but my article on the origins and basics of the multiple truth hypothesis, and so I saw that um, show you saw that analytics. My first one had 27 views so far, maybe like
Not bad.
56 views on my last one. So thank God. So keep at it. Hopefully, people. So let me share some of these tabs. Samish comes on. Maybe we'll briefly mention the French elections that are happening right now. It looks like it's going to be a runoff of Macron and Le Pen, and Eric Zemmour didn't do as good as fourth place, only less than 10% of the vote. But here was a recent video on Napoleon's Sanhedrin around 1800, where he emancipated the Jews, gave Jews full European citizenship, and convened a meeting of the rabbis. Interesting video. I've discussed that on my channel before. Here, Edward Dutton talking about, can you tell a narcissist just from the eyebrows, and possible links between bushiness of eyebrows or various factors of the eyebrows specifically connected to narcissism, but other things maybe like testosterone levels. So minorly interesting. And he also had Lipton Matthews on, and I guess Lipton Matthews seems to have kind of plateaued here at like 1500. Just keep on interviewing. It's like the style of just interviewing academics, not really being active with a chat or anything. It seems to have plateaued, even though he has relatively big names. Um, Bill Mueller explaining jokes, Oscars edition. Um, Kind of like the degeneracy of humor, even just his analysis of what makes things funny, and the purpose of humor is kind of social criticism or whatever. So even Bill Mueller's
Or just laughing nervously because someone's such a total psycho.
even the attempt to defend humor kind of goes along with that humor is degenerate in general. You show this. So Noam Chomsky was on in depth on C-SPAN, almost 2 hours of Noam Chomsky. I studied linguistics, and so Noam Chomsky hasn't done much in linguistics. Like, he got famous in linguistics, and now is basically a social commentator. But pretty big scholar, knows a lot about a lot. So it's interesting. That was last week Sunday. I read this book. It was from the 80s. It was kind of interesting. Among the Thugs by Bill Buford. And it was about football violence in England and at soccer in the 80s and 90s. and just about mass violence. And I guess soccer violence is still pretty big, but it was bigger at the time. And he gets embedded with thugs and analyzes what is it about crowd violence. Talks to some of the characters, even the National Front. I guess Marine Le Pen's from the National Front, or that maybe not her party, but her father's party was. Some people consider neo-Nazi, uh, but that was back in the 80s. But also kind of like mainstream, just football violence and people who are actively, the thrill of the violence, and once you've experienced the violence, and so it was a relatively interesting book. Um, so and I was a few times this week on this channel, Titans TV. Zobita invited me, and it was, I guess, an African um, Pan Africanist in London, and he was talking about Islam and like a Ramadan special where he's talking about the nature of the prophecy of of Muhammad and his take on it. And I talked afterwards in private call with some of his Pan Africanists, pretty semi hostile, but so I was on a few times. It was a little bit interesting, talking about the nature of Muhammad and what is the significance? What does prophecy mean?
Like hostile, like what it was like with Adam, or what?
Well, I mean, hostile in the way that kind of like Black Israelites are. So I mean, hostile in their own unique way. So kind of like Zobita in a certain way too, where they ask like questions, but they don't really want to hear the answer. They want to prove that you're a hypocrite. So it was basically Socratic method that they
I
like
was just thinking that.
a Black Israelite unique version of the Socratic method. But even offline, where it was just me and them, like they tried to Socratic me for hours and hours, and then eventually just gave up on that. So, but I Kamal, I had reasonably good talks with him. So maybe I'll appear on his stream again. And my buddy Jake Turks, been a while, was interviewed on an Orthodox Jewish channel from Borough Park to the White House, just talking, some of the same things like you don't really represent the Jewish community, just by being a Hasidic Jew in public space, and he's obviously, the famous one who was yelled at by President Trump, and he's still in the White House. Press for Ami magazine. So anyone interested in Hasidic Judaism, Jake Turks is probably one of the most well-known visible Hasidic Jews in the world, media character, White House press corps. Here also, I saw this documentary. It kind of reminded me, like I call like Charles Hasbora, The Viewing Booth, where is a video of a person watching videos of violence in Israel, and a Jewish girl, and the reaction, and it focuses on this one girl whose instinct is to defend everything the Israelis do, which kind of is like, I think like Charles Moskowitz also has that instinct. So even all the videos, no matter what it's showing, it's just like naturally like defending, like in somewhat like a prototypical way, but it also has the deal with cognitive dissonance and the understanding of violence, where okay, these people are being violent on my behalf, and I support and defend them, and so it's an interesting documentary called the Viewing Booth, which I guess was made to be kind of Israeli activism piece, like for peace, but psychologically kind of like God forbid the Clockwork Orange. We're just like watching a bunch of these screens of disturbing images and seeing the person's reaction to them. Okay, so I have a bunch of stuff on physics and perturbation theory, and because I was kind of embarrassed by my lack of ability to explain perturbation theory because it involves a lot of
Are you sure
higher
it's a
math.
unified doctrine? Because I don't know that I have that. I don't have that impression that it's even very well developed.
Well, it is. So I'm going to explain it. I'm going to read a little bit from a paper also. So it comes classically from the three body problem of celestial mechanics of having three gravitational forces, and that's was the original necessitation of perturbation theory. But now perturbation theory is quite commonly used in quantum theory. And so here's an interesting video on um, the three body problem, and it actually talks about the Lagrangians and possible putting a satellite in Lagrange 3 or 4, and we'll call like a torus. So when I get more into perturbation theory, um, you'll see this concept of the torus, which is basically saying there's uncertainty and there's chaos, and you could have an area within the chaos that comes to like a torus. So when you have three objects, it becomes unpredictable, but the unpredictability still will be within a torus shape. So how is the object going to rotate? And as opposed to having a clean rotation, it will have a toroid type shape rotation that it will be within the boundaries of, and that's the type solutions to perturbation theory. So I'm going to get a little more into it. This video had pretty good graphics. So are you familiar with Henry
Poincaré? I've heard the name, not actually too familiar with his work directly.
So yeah, he was a polymath. He did all types of stuff. Some of it was related to Einstein, algebra, special theory of relativity. He set some of the framework for what became the special theory of relativity and the Lorentz ether theory, and also even one of the precursors for the mass energy relationship, but most specifically the three body problem. And he wrote thousands of pages on the three body problem. So I think also he came from somewhat of a famous family. He had like a cousin who was French president or something like that. So let me just see, did I get a... Okay, so there's actually an institute for Henry Poincaré. Most of it's in French, but a lot of it's in English. They had some pretty interesting videos on all sorts of subjects. That Poincaré was a polymath, and set some of the foundations for all sorts of mathematics. This week at the Royal Institute, David Chalmers. So unfortunately, the Science of Consciousness conference, they did not reply to Jennifer. So I'm going to try calling them tomorrow, and I was going to register.
They did reply. They just didn't answer my question. I see.
Yeah, I guess they were. Yeah, I wanted to know, like, one thing I wanted to know, like, does $300 is like a $20 fee to $320 include admission for two people or just one? And it's unclear. And so $320 is expensive, and if it was $640, that's a lot of money. And I also wanted to know, like, the nature of, like, whether they'll have a chat, not just like a Q&A, but we better talk with other panelists. So if even $320, even $640, if they had an open chat and were able to talk amongst the panelists, maybe it'd be worth paying $640 for me and Jennifer. But if it's just going to be like to watch videos and at best like ask a few questions that might be asked to the panelists, I'm not sure it's worth it. So Jennifer did not have any luck on getting that answered. So I'm going to try to call, and I guess, God forbid if they don't answer the question, I take it as a bad sign that it's probably not a well put together conference. As mentioned on eBay, Doooovid's eBay here, I constantly get pegged for questions about like $2 objects. So here I'm about to I'll send some offers out here. So here 3 books, they're $7. I'm going to send it for $6, plus shipping. And people constantly ask me, they want pictures. So this book is only $1. 1776 American history. I'm offering it for $1. And people send and ask me questions and expect it to be answered. And so God forbid, hopefully they would be able to answer some basic questions on the conference, and if not, it's a bad sign. So but Jennifer didn't have any luck, so I'm going to try calling tomorrow, and we'll see about that. The Glenn show this week had comedy hour. For some reason, Glenn Lowry was at a Comedy Cellar, and he was talking about the nature of humor, and also kind of um, legitimizing um, Doovid's theory on humor. But Glenn makes some comedic jokes. He gets claps, not laughter, and so you don't want claps, you want laughter. And there's a diverse crew there, so pretty interesting conversation. Actually, this one got pretty big views, not as high, even almost as big as not as big as Sam Harris, but actually I think he gets pretty big views regularly. But so check that out. Here was University of Michigan um, special lecture on Moire quantum matter, and I watched it, although it was kind of about like graphene structures. So it's my alma mater, University of Michigan. So let me do a quick chant. So I didn't have any chant ready. I wasn't thinking in terms of music, and right before the show, so I was thinking this famous song. Even Jennifer had heard of it, the House of the Rising Sun, originally by the Animals. So you said you're familiar with this song?
Yeah, I've heard it a whole bunch of times, parties and stuff.
It's a pretty famous song. So ironically, it's actually an older song that goes back possibly even to the Civil War. Uh, there's written record of it to the early 1900s. There's recorded records to the 1930s, and Eric Burton of the Animals heard it at a lounge, at a Buddy Holly or some sort of concert, British band, the Animals, and decided to start playing it and record it, and actually became one of their most popular songs. Um, Maybe Eric Burden, after the Animals, founds the band War. Another song, "Spill the Wine, Get That Girl." Does that sound familiar to you? Spill the wine, get that
Yeah,
girl.
definitely.
So that was popular. I mean, they were a British band. He actually also teamed up like the Rolling Stones with African Americans, and God forbid the song is about um, a whorehouse in New Orleans, and so there's actually female versions to it. There's a house in New Orleans. It's called the Rising Sun. It's been the ruin of many poor girl. Great God, I am one. Um,
I thought it
the
was boy.
Well, that's the famous recording. It's saying it's a folk song that goes back decades before, and there's even version to say,
It got switched from girl to boy.
well, it's a dispute among historians. It's unknown. So there are versions of a female and male version going back as a folk song. So the Animals, obviously, he recorded as the male, but there are previous versions as a female. So it's unknown if the original song was a prostitute song, or a song about someone seeing prostitutes, or God forbid, the song of a son of a prostitute. Um, so here was an old version. Um, if you go to Lowestoft and ask for the rising sun, there you'll find two old whores, and my old woman is one. God forbid. So the previous version. But the intent of the song is kind of clear. It's an ode to a whorehouse in New Orleans, and Um, so it's pretty famous lyrics. I'll
Oh, that
channel
makes
it.
sense. I never knew that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a house in New Orleans they call the rising sun, and it's been the ruin of many a poor boy. And God, I know I'm one. I guess it's like A minor arpeggio organ introduction in the Animals version that became very famous. So it was interesting. That's considered possibly the very first classical music song. So it had a heavy song. This is 1964. The Beatles are first starting in the early Beatles era, where they're more clean cut, and this animal song. So this folk song, like God forbid, the world's oldest profession. There's probably always drinking songs. Even like in Rome, there was songs in Greece about prostitution. So like a common folk medley about degeneracy, things like wouldn't be a church song, but something you might hear, uh, who knows, but like a Civil War song, where there is such a phenomenon as the whorehouse. Um, but this recording in a rock type way became, to many, it's considered the first classic rock song, and it became quite a famous song. It is probably the most famous Animal song. Their next most famous song is "Spill the Wine," and it said Bob Dylan heard the song and decided to switch to electric guitar. Bob Dylan was doing folk music at the time with an acoustic guitar, and after he heard House of the Rising Sun, he switched to electric guitar. So I'll mention quickly also from the era the Zombies, and I've mentioned the song "Time of the Season." I think I've sang it on Week in Review a few times, and it's considered an era song of the '60s of like psychedelic music. I mentioned Jefferson Airplane, White Rabbit, and Want Somebody to Love. This was 1968. Um, this What's your name? Who's your daddy? Is he really rich like me? Has he taken any time to show you what you need? Tell it to me slowly. Tell you what I really want to know. It's the time of the season for loving. I missed sung that, and it even has two parts and like echo to it. But
Sounded good
this
to
is
me.
well, I didn't sing it the right key or no, but yeah, good enough to get the song. But this is like before the switch, like it's before Woodstock. Even at Woodstock, where you have a hint towards degeneracy, like the house in New Orleans and Time of the Season, where it's not necessarily like promiscuity. Like the Beatles still get married, they sing about love and meeting girls, but they still are largely monogamous and don't practice promiscuity. And even John Lennon and Paul McCartney um, end up stayed married to the same woman their whole life. Um, but the nature of like the love song slowly moving into the lust song, but it happens slowly. So uh, if people know the band Argent, so Time of the Season was by the Zombies, and the Zombies um, breaks up, and one of the head singers of the band is named Rod Argent, and he forms a band called Argent, and they have a few hits. They have a song called "Hold Your Head Up" that also has a organ. Hold your head up, boy. Hold your head up, boy. It got a pretty good song. I used to like it, and maybe most notably, the "God Gave Rock and Roll to You" that's in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, redone by Kiss. God gave rock and roll to you, put it in the soul for everyone. So that was Rod Argent in the 70s. That a little bit interesting. So you need some auto tune there. So I didn't prepare these. I didn't even listen to the songs to get the right key. So I just thought I'd give a little chant in music, kind of like the '60s uh, to the period. Um, so let's look at the origins of um, perturbation theory. And perturbation theory derives from the three body problem and then becomes very useful mathematical tool for quantum mechanics. So here's a whole like 90-page article on Poincare and the three body problem in very in detail, but the two body problem and the three body problem is possibly one of the single most famous problems in all of physics. Uh, but specifically just related to perturbation theory, because I said one of the main drives of physics was always to understand um, celestial motion. And Newton, when he discovers or describes, prescription or description, um, the gravitational equations that become the precursors for celestial mechanics, it becomes clear that three body problems are impossible to calculate, that you can't actually solve the three body problem. That once you could have two bodies and you could describe their motion perfectly, but when you add the third body, you can't solve the differential equations and you need an estimating method. And so perturbation theory uh, becomes this main estimation method for um, so let me read just the introduction here, because this perturbation theory is quite important. And I'm not going to get into the toroid shapes, but might relate to some of Jennifer's theories that
Well, the
perturbation theory.
torus seems like the most important part to go into, but
Well, because that involves high levels of mathematics. The solution to the perturbation theory will be a toroid. So let me just read some of this. The two body problem can be solved by, I'm going to take it off of screen share.
okay.
The two-body problem can be solved by means of Kepler's law, according to which for negative energies, the point mass planets move on ellipses with the sun located in one of the two foci. The dynamics become extremely complicated
It's
when
foci,
adding the
I
gravity.
think.
What?
I think it's foci. It's definitely not foci. It could be foci, but that would be unlikely. I think it's foci. It's one of those weird. I don't know. Maybe
Okay, well, in
just
Latin it might be a hard C, but uh, okay. The dynamics between extremely complicated when adding the gravitational influence of another body. Indeed, Poincare showed that the three-body problem does not admit a sufficient number of prime integrals which allow it to integrate the problem. Nevertheless, a special attention deserves the so-called restricted three-body problem, namely when the mass of one of the three bodies is so small that its influence on the others can be neglected. In this case, one can assume that the primaries move on Keplerian ellipses around the common barycenter if the mass of one of the primaries is much larger than the other, as in the case of the sun planet sample. The motion of the minor body is governed by nearly integrable equations, where the integrable part represents the interaction with the major body, while the perturbation is due to the influence of the other primary. Hence perturbation theory. A typical example is provided by the motion of an asteroid under the gravitational attraction of the Sun and Jupiter. The small body may be taken not to influence the motion of the primaries, which are assumed to move on elliptical trajectories. The dynamics of the asteroid is essentially driven by the Sun and perturbed by Jupiter. Since the Jupiter-Sun mass ratio is about 10 to the negative third, the solution of this kind of problem stimulated the work of scientists, especially in the 18th and 19th century. Indeed, Lagrange, Laplace, Leverrier, Delaunay, Tisserand, and Poincare developed perturbation theories which are at the basis of the study of dynamics of celestial bodies, from the computation of the ephemerides to the recent advances of flight dynamics. For example, on the basis of perturbation theory, Delaunay developed a theory of the moon, providing very refined ephemerides. Celestial mechanics, let me just put up here, what's an ephemeride? So ephemerides.
I've never heard that. It makes me think of the word ephemeral. Would be derived
Yeah,
from that.
it's a book of tables that gives the trajectory of naturally occurring astronomical objects as well as artificial. So it's just a doc of astronomical information. Celestial mechanics greatly motivated the advances of perturbation theories as witnessed by the discovery of Neptune. Its position was theoretically predicted by John Adams and by John Urbain Leverrier on the basis of perturbative computations following the suggested provided by the theoretical investigations. Neptune was finally discovered on the 23rd of September, 1846, by astronomer Jonathan Gottfried Gale. And that was saying that the perturbations, they knew that Neptune existed because there were perturbations that were caused by it. But that's for a different time. The aim of perturbation theory is to implement a canonical transformation which allows to find the solution of a nearly integrable system within a better degree of approximation. So I'll skip the mathematics of how this could be done. Classical perturbation theory can be implemented provided that the frequency vector satisfies a non-resonant relation, which means that there does not exist, in case there exists a commensurability condition, a resonant perturbation theory can be developed as outlined later in this paper. Encourage people to read it. In general, the three-body problem, and more extensively the n-body problem, is described by a degenerate Hamiltonian system, which means that the integrable part, i.e. the Keplerian approximation, depends on the subset of the action variables. In this case, the degenerate perturbation theory must be implemented for all the above perturbation theories, classical, resonant, and degenerate. An application to celestial mechanics is given. The precession of the perihelion of Mercury, orbital resonances within a three-body framework, the precession of the equinox. Even a non-resonance condition is satisfied. The quantity of frequency and mass can become arbitrarily small, giving rise to the so-called small divisor problem. Indeed, these terms appear at the denominator of the series defining the canonical transformations necessary to implement perturbation theory, and therefore they might prevent the convergence of the series. In order to overcome the small divisor problem, a breakthrough came with the work of Kolmogorov, later extended to different mathematical settings. The overall theory is known with an acronym CAM. So this article then goes into the mathematics, which are rather complicated. So maybe we'll look more into the perturbation theory. But if I mentioned the toroid in the video I showed at the beginning that have some of these shapes. That what happens is you have a series of solutions that are of higher magnitude that give you more and more precision. And it's actually, Poincare is also considered the father of chaos theory. So the chaos theory comes in because at a certain point, you can't actually predict the movement of the planets. And what you get is a toroid shape for where the planet will be within. And so if you look generally the solar system, planetary motion is flat, and that planets like the Earth and all the Paul Shalom, all the planets in the solar system will be largely flat. However, they bounce and shake, but they do that within, and it's in a chaotic way where you can't exactly predict the exact movements of the planet, but you can calculate the boundary conditions within the chaos. So chaos theory uh, implies that it has chaotic movement that is unpredictable. However, you could predict the boundaries that the chaos will be contained within. And that was the origins of perturbation theory and celestial mechanics. And then I saw last week in some of these slides that perturbation theory is much more commonly used now with the wave equation and quantum theory, and also the same nature of probability curves, where it's chaotic, you can't make a prediction, but you could create a probability curve and you could show the limits of the chaos, that although there's chaos, they'll be within a certain boundary, and then even have like a probability curve of where
I don't know
things
about why they would want to call it chaos. Because it seems like it's moving. It's just not like what does they mean by chaotic? The unpredictable, I guess. Like that's basically that it's an interval of predictability past which it's impossible to predict the position.
Yeah, and I think in the perturbation, when like the binomial gets to like x squared or already, that it becomes unpredictable. So in the mathematical method, the first perturbation might be like like 1, then x squared, then x cubed, and already at x squared is, so to say, chaotic, where it's unpredictable because the solutions to the differential equations give multiple solutions. And that'll be chaotic in the way that it jumps, and that what you thought was the solution could all of a sudden shift to some sort of different answer than was predicted. And that's why I said Poincare is one of the fathers of chaos theory. So that's my week in review. I hope Samish comes on. He messaged earlier. He saw my article on the multiple truth hypothesis, and he read it and gave me some critique. So I told him he should join for week in review, and then also, because of the French elections, maybe he would have some insight. Although he hasn't appeared to see my message. It was a few hours ago. So if he
look who's in the chat. Good evening,
okay,
Professor Ben Said. Won't you
yeah.
please join us on the show for some feedback?
So if you want to do your week in review, and then we'll bring on Samish, and hopefully he could give some constructive criticism to my essay, and of interest, say he's a professor of environmental sociology, and said that there was something like the multiple truth hypothesis in sociology also, which doesn't surprise me. And if he wants to give some insight on the French election, so why don't you do your week in review, and hopefully Samish will get ready. That there was something like the multiple truth hypothesis, so he's already here, which doesn't surprise me. So you want to
save your. I noticed that when you joined, you had audio playing, Samish. So I've just muted you, and when you have your audio turned off and you're ready to speak, you can go ahead and unmute. I've got just a couple articles here.
You want to do that now, or you want to wait till after we talk with Samish?
Yeah, we can wait. I did do a new video this week for those of you who are interested, which I will be sharing soon. So Samish, we'll hand it over to you, and Doovid will hopefully be actually, yeah, go ahead. Are you able to unmute? Samish? You have to actually push the button on the window, and it's at the bottom because you're muted right now and we can't hear you.
It may be, I'm not sure if a lot of these perturbation theory came from France. Poincare, and it even said like his cousin was even like president of France or something. I don't know if there was a Poincare that was president of France or some high politician. Lagrange, a lot of the perturbation theory were French, but I'm not sure if Samish knows anything about these famous French mathematicians like Poincare. And if you want to comment on anything I said in the open, or some brief comment about the French elections, and then maybe some constructive.
Hi.
Hey, Samish, thanks. Okay, we got you now.
if you want to
You got
Should
to
I?
turn off the volume on your
open
YouTube video.
some brief comment about the French elections, and then maybe some
Yeah,
constructive.
I just muted you again because you got to mute your audio coming out of on your end because it's coming through here and it's so you just have to mute you just basically pause the video if you have it on. I think that's what's doing it.
Yeah, I mean, if the delay on your microphone is so slow that it's not actually the YouTube video, if it was just a YouTube video that was running in the background, then all you have to
Or
do
he
is
might have two of the
pause
windows.
or
He might have two
turn the
windows
volume
open.
off, and
You might have two windows open. Could that be possible? And if that's what's happening, just close the window and join again.
okay, so hopefully.
Am I in now?
Well, the two of you.
I don't know.
Okay, so
I just removed him. Hopefully it's just a small glitch and he can just rejoin. And the audio will work itself out. Because if it's not the YouTube video, then I'm not sure what to say. If it's not the YouTube video, I'm just going to ask him if he can still hear us. Oh, here we go. All right, so
I'm in now.
you're in, and it looks like we are no longer hearing any problematic audio.
Okay.
So welcome to the show, and thanks for joining.
Oh, no problem. I just had the YouTube on, I guess. I didn't know it would interfere.
it always does. It's the most common
Okay.
thing. And in fact, in the olden days, like on radio, you like the Larry King show, you'll hear like you like caller turn off. You have to turn the volume off on your TV. So even back in the old days of radio, when people called into shows, it was the single most common problem. And you hear you're like caller call. You got to turn off the the volume on your radio or your TV.
I think I had the YouTube on, seeing you with the chat. But now when I have with the meeting that's just direct here, I can't see the chat. So which is fine because since we're going to talk about
Well, you
the
should be able to. You just have to turn off the volume. So you can either just pause the video, or you could leave the video running and turn and mute the volume on the
okay
YouTube. So I
on
mean, it's
YouTube.
really quite
Okay.
simple. Like figure it out. And I mean, like Charles, I think he got it. Like it took like Charles like a year till he figured it out. It's just called like boomer tech. Like anyone
Yeah.
under, even someone with like a 70 IQ under 40 knows how to do it. But even highly intelligent people from the previous generation, it's very difficult. Like the boomer tech.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but
Anyway,
yeah, I mean, you should be able to see the chat, and just make
it's
sure the volume isn't playing.
isn't funny. Okay, it's fine. I don't need to do the chat, but I was just very. I congratulate you on the new newsletter. It's pretty cool. In fact, I myself wants to put all the what I wrote all these years, contributing to many people of articles in many different blogs, to put it into a format where people can read it. So I'm going to ask you later on, maybe later on, in terms of how did you do that, in terms of putting a link on Facebook for people to read that. So that was really cool. So
Twitter has a free publishing blog called
okay.
Review. I mean, there's all
Good.
sorts of like Blogspot or Medium, but I use the Twitter one. It's very tough these days. Like even academically, even if you could get published, it's hard to sell books, and then you have to become like Charles Moskowitz, where part of the purpose of your show is to sell your own books. So
Well,
like
okay, I
if
see.
you published a book of your collective writings, who would be the target audience? I mean, if you're a professor, if you could force students to use it in a class, but who would likely do that? So then you have to become like a media personality to self promote. But
Right.
Me and Jennifer are already somewhat media person, at least media personalities. and have a bunch of ideas that
Okay.
want to put work on books. So I took upon myself Jennifer's nagging to write an article every week. And
That's that's very good. That's very good because with your multiple truth of hypothesis, that was really good to write something about it and explain it. Of course, as I said in my comment, that yeah, you can speak about you can talk about it, but however, it didn't. It needed some more in terms of when do you use it. For me, I perceive there's no truth. There was no one truth. Maybe there was one ultimate truth, but there's multiple truth about subject matters. So therefore, when can we use it to at least tell people that they whatever they hold in terms of opinion or ideas are just only one approach by which they arrive at that. There's other approach, other angles that they could really look at, and that's why I compared it to in sociology. It's called the multiple paradigm discipline. It just does not. There's no one way to look at one thing. There's different ways, different approach, and these approaches affect the way people do research because they come up with questions or hypotheses about subject matter, and it depends which approach you use to arrive to do the research and maybe explain that this particular perspective or viewpoint is better than another one. But of course, as you know, sociology has been dominated since the 1960s by this, what we call a conflict theory or conflict perspective, which is really Marxist in a sense. But there is others like functional theory, there is like a symbolic interaction, there is an ecological theory, which I adhere to a little bit, but some subjects do not really fit the ecological model. But so when you said multiple truth hypothesis, it always begs the questions or begs the questions in terms, which truth are you talking about? Which subject matter? Like in terms of God, probably the religion, that's what you really refer to. Yeah, everybody try to reach this ultimate creator. That's therefore not one religion is better than the other. However, one can go at the religion from a critical point of view from each of these religions and find some problems and critique. See what I'm trying to say? So basically, multiple hypothesis is very good because it allows you to appreciate other perspectives, not to reject them totally. Well, in some instances, there are points or elements in one theory or one approach that could be debated, that could be critiqued in a sense, and try to change it or adapt it to the modern or to a certain context. So I'm glad you wrote it, but if you can really expand it even more, and I wanted to speak about it because I can give you an example of how the different perspective in sociology deal with the question of religion. I can present something, but then again, maybe then it'd be next time. So, but I have a presentation that I that I can share with you because I used to share with my students in terms of using the institution of religion, broadly defined.
we mean like a
Uh,
PowerPoint?
yes, I have a PowerPoint.
We have it ready right now.
Yes. So, what do I do? Do I do the more option and then share it or present now?
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer, you want to see Samish's PowerPoint?
You can try and share it. You have to have it already open.
Okay.
I'm going to
think
pour
I do.
myself a drink. I'm going to mute myself. I'll let Jennifer explain to you how to do it.
Yeah. Okay. First, you have to open it in, I guess, whatever
Okay,
program
I
it is,
have it open.
and then you go to. Let me see here. On the bottom, I think it's the fourth button from the left, and it's an upward arrow, and it says present now.
Yeah.
And you're going to select a window
Okay.
out of the options.
Yeah.
And then a list is going to come up and select the PowerPoint. And if it works, it'll Like you got to click OK or whatever, but I'll see it if it works. And if it doesn't work, well,
Do you see it now?
no. So maybe next time if we can't, I mean, if we can't get this going now, we would love to have you go through the presentation next time. And sometimes these troubleshooting things take a while and ends up having to be a share screen because whatever, you know. Okay, it looks like now it did work. There we go. Okay, so what you're sharing right now is not a PowerPoint, it is a file folder. So you want to stop sharing that and do the exact same thing again, but out of the list of things that you can share, you have to before you share a screen, you have to open the PowerPoint. Is it open?
Yes, it is open.
You can look at it and see it. Okay. So out of the list of things to share, which is the button on this window here that I'm on with the arrow on it, present now, and you select a window. There you go. And just give it a second here. All right, that worked.
Okay, do you see it now?
Yeah, we can see everything you can.
Okay, do you see like the religion is a system of belief and value that helps maintain important symbols about the meaning of life, word creation?
I'm looking at structural functional perspective right now. That's the title.
Okay.
What I'm seeing is structural functional perspective.
Okay.
But we can read everything, which is great.
Do you see the roles, functions do religion play in society?
Yeah.
And how important are
yeah.
Are these
I can see all that.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone can see that.
Okay. As I'm scrolling down, I'm adding more stuff. Do you see it now?
We can't see that. We can just see the one you have clicked on. So if you want us to see a different slide, you got to click on a different slide in your presentation. So right now you're on slide 2, and when you want to advance, you just click on slide 3, and that's what everyone's going to see.
Okay. Do you see the whole slide, or you see just only functions, manifest functions, and so on?
I see the whole slide number 2, but I don't see the entire PowerPoint because there's no point to sharing it all.
Yeah, I know. So you see the functions, you see manifest and dysfunctions. Is that right?
Yep, all the way to brainwashing mass suicides with crystal therapy.
Okay. One perspective is called the structural functionalist perspective, and again, as I said, you look at what functions that do religion play in society. Of course, there is many of them. As I suggested before, there is manifest one. The manifest one are the one that we call recognize. It provides meaning to spiritual matters and purpose of life. It's also guidance, ethical and moral principle, as it's stressed there. There is also emotional support, mental well-being, social integration. Religions also play a role in integrating people, solidarity, giving a common sense for all the group, right? But also there's entertainment, TV, religious shows, songs, and TV soap operas, and so on. One of the stuff that sometimes the structural functionalist perspective talks about is not only look at the function of it, but also the dysfunction. What kind of negative functions it plays? One of them is you can justify it, but you can use the religion to justify persecution of other minorities, or else you can use it for terror or war. And also the cults, as we talked about, okay? So, and then the second one is a conflict perspective. Do you see it? Hello?
Yeah, if you want us to see it, you have to click it.
Okay, so do you see it now?
3. So you see where it says 3 conflict perspective? Just click on that on the left, and then
okay, okay. Do you see it now? Conflict perspective.
No. See how number 2 has a red box around it? On the left-hand side, you see a bunch of different slides there. Can you try to explain this to me? Like I'm not getting through here, but it's on the left of your screen, and you have to click on the third slide.
Yeah, I would have just had him share his whole screen. but which is
He is sharing. Well, why would you have him share his whole screen?
because that way we just see what he's saying.
You can see what he's seeing. All you have to do is click on the screen that he's sharing, and you can see exactly what he's sharing. And it's the PowerPoint, and he's not doesn't know how to click on slide 3.
You
And
don't
I'm
have to
trying
argue
explain
about it,
to
but
him,
I'm
and I
saying
can't.
that that's why I just share my whole screen. It's usually easier. People just share their whole screen, but Yosemite, that's
Like,
not
are
what
you
he's doing.
seriously not understanding that the problem is on the level of clicking on slide 3, and that has nothing to do with being sharing the full screen or not? Samish, on the left-hand side of the PowerPoint, do you see how there's tiny icons of all the slides?
No, I'm doing the stuff. I'm doing
There
the
you go. You just clicked it. There you go. Now we can see
okay.
conflict perspective. That's all you have to do.
No, I was doing the what do you call it? The larger one, not to look at the stuff. But anyway, that's fine.
It's
So the
good. We can
conflict
see. We
perspective.
can see it all. We're good. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Now we talked about the structural functionalist perspective, but the next one is again the conflict perspective. There's another way to look at religion. The conflict perspective look at it from it's a critical view of religion. It asks as some groups or have the upper hand or power over other, as the mass do not have anything. Who and ask also the questions as who benefits more from religious ideology? Who created these ideologies? So one of the basic tenets of the conflict perspective is that religion could be used as a social control. And Marx opium of the people. It could you be used also as a propaganda indoctrination, as most totalitarian ideology, political ideology, they could also be viewed as religions too. It could also maintain and perpetuate social inequality, elite alliances with religious groups, specifically during the feudal time. Of course, the Catholic Church was all with the mass aristocracy, putting down all the peasants down and marginalizing them. Also, you could also use religion to justify and legitimize action against others, or to maintain a consensus, or to keep power. Okay. Another thing about the conflict perspective is to look at critical view about the churches as corporation for profits. Religions do. Churches do not pay taxes, especially in the United States, asking for money from congregation and so on. So basically, the conflict perspective always look at the critical view that religion could be used as a weapon against other people, or to maintain social inequalities, or to keep them, in a sense, to keep the status quo. Okay. Now, another one in sociology is called the feminist perspective. I mean, the feminist perspective could also give us an idea of how religion is viewed from a woman point of view. Most religions are driven by patriarchy. Okay, women are second-class minority in terms of major religions. I don't think that there is any, especially the Abrahamic religions, monotheistic religions, women are not really that viewed as a as equal to men, especially. I'm not saying that I'm misogynistic, but again, it's the idea that women are a weaker sex, or weaker gender, and must obey the men all the time. And when you look at the structure or the institutions of richest institution, hardly any women hold a great position of power. Now, in the what do you call it, the reformist or reform churches and reform Judaism, there are women priests and rabbi, which is changing. But for most Muslim countries, women hold no education. They do not have any education, and again, it's the fundamental idea that religion could be viewed from a feminist perspective, and you could do research as to why the whole religious ideology is really based on patriarchy, when one could disagree with that. Now, the last one is called the symbolic interaction. Now, symbolic interaction perspective is a little bit toward the psychology a little bit, but then again, it's the idea that society does not really happen, it's not outside of us. It's individual interacting with one another that help sort of create a society in terms of how people act and think and influence one another. So somebody coming in from a symbolic interaction could ask question as to how religion is experienced by people. What is their religious experience? How do they view it? How do they view religion? How does it play a role in their common life, individual life? Okay, what is the criteria that what can define one as religious or one as non-religious, or moderate or fundamentalist or whatever? How does religious behavior, thought, and idea change the person, change from one person to the other? So basically, the symbolic interaction ask some fundamental question about how do we experience religion? Because from this perspective, religion does not exist without people making it. It's the people that makes religion and define it as so. If there was no people defining it, going to church, voting for some religious individuals, there would be no religion. If people do not read the text, the religious text, there would not be a religion. So basically, the symbolic interaction is very interesting because really it asks us fundamental question as to what is the influence of religious belief on individual behavior and so on. So you see, I gave you 4 different perspectives, and each one look at something. It's like a camera. You put a lens. Okay, each lens give you a different view of about religion. So each one are really equally important in understanding the overall religious experience or religion as an institution. That's why I wanted to explain to you that the multiple truth hypothesis is similar to this multiple paradigm approach to understanding a specific problem. Of course, I gave you the questions of religion, but it could be on anything. You could look at the welfare. You could look at the educational system, right? So an educational system, you can look at from a symbolic interaction as what is the relationship between a teacher and the students? How do they relate to one another? Or for example, what is the role of parents in educating their children? From a conflict perspective, you can look at the educational system as perpetuating social inequality. How? Well, the rich send their kids to private school, get better education. The poor ends up going to community colleges and small colleges where they perpetuate social inequality. So each one gives us a different, not so much truth, but a different perspective, or give us a different angle at looking at something. And I don't know whether you agree with me, Doovid, is whether this is the same thing as what you trying to say to people about the multiple truth hypothesis, that you cannot hold onto one perspective and say, this is it, this is how we should look at this. No, maybe there are other approaches. And specifically in social issues, it's very, very, very important. Now in science, well, like in physics, God, I mean, I don't think there is many different perspectives. I mean, everybody's striving to get the theory of everything and so on, and what do you call it, consolidation theory or something like that. Of just forget about the what do you call it, the Big Bang and so on like that. Everybody is trying to uphold a certain type of view about how the universe has evolved and how it's going to be in the future. So that's what I wanted to share with you. So excuse me if I was a little bit rough in terms of explaining the religion, but I could give it easily another example about other social issue. So it all depends in which truth we're talking about. Multiple truth hypothesis, which truth are we talking about? Or which topic or which ideas are we debating? And then we can go and look at it from what are the multiple way to look at it. Okay? That's it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Is this something you use for your classes or for seminars?
Yes, I do. This one I use for my classes because the perspectives are kind of an important way to introduce students to to sociological thinking and so on. Because it's very important that people really respect other approaches, but it doesn't mean that you should accept these approaches as given and you should not critique them. Certainly, but they are valid in terms of how
What
you
if
look
someone
at it.
tells you they don't want to hear a critique ever and it's against their tradition to receive a critique? Would that be valid?
No, it's not valid. I mean, why would
That's weird.
why would they not accept it?
Because a
You don't
critique
have to.
implies better knowledge, and better knowledge isn't always possible. And so it would be inappropriate to critique unless one could establish superior knowledge.
No, well, I mean, you can critique it if you have evidence, of course. Why not? I don't see why you should not
Okay.
critique something if you. But of course, it has to be in a nice way. You know, you cannot just say this is rubbish while you cannot provide any evidence toward why this is rubbish. I mean, to look at religion from a feminist perspective is to me as valid as somebody saying that it is used as an opium to the masses. It's valid. Maybe I would not agree with it, maybe because I'm not a feminist, I'm not going to study it, but it's not really, I should not just completely disregard it as one approach that I should not look at. In fact, I should look at it and I should read it. And as probably as Doovid would suggest, multiple hypothesis allows you to look at other approaches. You might not agree with them, but at least you should be
What
aware
about
that
looking at the approach that doesn't allow dissenting views unless the person has demonstrably superior knowledge?
well, if well, this to me, that's if you say there's
You've never
a
researched it, have you?
which one?
The perspective that denies the legitimacy of critique sans superior knowledge.
No, I didn't look at it. I mean, to me, that doesn't that if some people do not accept critique, I don't think it's part of the scientific inquiry.
Well, science is a lot more than just critique. Science is almost zero to do with critique. It's about
Well,
hypotheses and predictions and validating them. I mean, unless you're going to consider nature to be criticizing your theory by virtue of disproving it, I don't see how it's critical in that sense.
well, I don't know whether I agree with you about you should not critique something if it doesn't provide better understanding of something. You may not have something to present, but if you find some flaws in some argument
Well,
or
that's the thing.
some.
Who's to say that they're flaws according to your flawed judgment? They might not be
No,
flaws at all.
you saying that I have a flaw. I'm just telling you
I'm
if
not
there
saying
is
you have
some.
a flawed judgment. I'm saying the idea on its own merits, just as a hypothetical.
Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly what if you do. It seems to me like you do not appreciate dissenting view about something,
I
right?
don't appreciate people trying to read my mind when I've stated an obvious thing
Well,
and hasn't been
no,
addressed. And now you're going
no,
into my
no.
state of mind. It's like, I don't want to go there, please. Let's
Well,
just talk about the position. So you're saying it's just not in your worldview to be able to consider that position.
Well, I'm just
position
talking
Fine. I
about
just wanted to verify
that's
talking
that.
about
something that's
canonized
something
sociology.
that
And
something
so,
is
the
better than other.
sociology of religion is from a different perspective. And like, I came at my multiple truth hypothesis from interfaith, where you do kind of take these things as absolute truths. And it was just pure Islam. In the beginning, it was just Islam and Jewish. And it'd just be like a long checkbox of, okay, like we agree on this and we disagree on this. And could have been like conflict theory, God forbid, like Charles, and we're talking about the violence in Israel or Al-Aqsa, where we're just saying like, no, we're going to rebuild the temple, and they think it's theirs, and we think it's ours, and yes, like one day we're going to kill each other because it's some absolute system. But we're talking about the soft science of sociology in the main schools. Um, Even physics, where you have uncertainty. If there's no uncertainty, then you don't really need a multiple perspective. But
Right,
so even in hard sciences like physics, there's still substantial uncertainty, especially within the philosophy of science. But in any of the soft sciences, psychology,
right,
sociology, linguistics, uh, something that's dependent on the hard problem of consciousness, there's substantial uncertainty, and so you're going to have different ways of looking at it, and they're
right,
going to have various explanatory phenomenon to understand the phenomenon that
right.
we perceive.
Right.
And so when you take religion, you're saying, okay, like it's it's a given, it's a truth, and it's a it's a canonical system where so when I first did interfaith with Muslims, I was the Jewish representative and the Muslim, and so it was assumed that I knew the Jewish doctrine, and when I spoke on behalf of Judaism, that was it. That was the doctrine. That's what we believe, and like kind of like cultish. Anyone from my sect would have given the same answer, and if it comes into a school of conflict where we have competing axioms like no, that's absolutely like was it the binding of Ishmael or was it the binding of Isaac?
Otherwise, right.
And
Right.
so like well, I'm a Jew, it was the binding of Isaac, that's absolute. And
Right.
the Muslim like it was the binding of Ishmael, that's absolute. That's a that's a doctrine that all Muslims like will die on that hill. And
Right.
so within the doctrine of religion, you say, okay, we're going to die on that hill. This is our doctrine, and you could,
Sure.
what does it mean we're going to die on that hill? And that's the nature of interfaith. Well, it's okay, like we don't have to kill each other because we disagree about
The
whether it was
binding.
the binding of Isaac or
Sure.
Ishmael.
Yeah.
Maybe over the all Aqsa Mosque, we would kill each other. But it was saying, if we're in New York, we don't have to, so to say that if I was trying to rebuild the temple and a Muslim was defending it, that they might, we would die on that hill. But if we're just talking, we could understand each other. And that was the point of the multiple truth hypothesis to say, what are the axioms? What are similar axioms? What are different axioms? And how is that going to draw to different conclusions? And
Right.
I was trying to more formalize a general system that would be somewhat scientific, mathematical, prepositional logic that might even have numerical estimates of truth. And so sociology, you could establish so if you want to understand a phenomenon, so to say, I'm going to use the sociological method to understand Judaism or Islam. Um, obviously practicing Jews or Muslims or Hindus or any system would like, no, that's not accurate. You can't use the academic method, to analyze what's doctrinally true. Like I will die on this hill, uh,
Yeah.
and but it's like no, that's the academic method, and it has an atheistic assumption uh, that to some extent I was trying to avoid, but and then you need methods or perspectives. How are we going to understand this issue? And then there's going to be pluses and minuses of using a method in terms of explaining the phenomenon. And so one method will have certain benefits
Sure.
in explanatory power that this perspective better explains this phenomenon than this perspective. Uh, but presumably, all of the major schools will have superior explanatory power, at least within certain methods. And
Right.
that
And
applies
so,
to physics too, like Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions and like
revolution. Yeah.
quantum theory. Anywhere where there's uncertainty, and you're going to have schools of thought, and the schools of thought will at least have areas where they have superior explanatory power. And so the multiple truth hypothesis was attempting to be more mathematical, logical, scientific, where you would actually break it down into axioms and see where the axioms are the same and see where they're different, and it would have predictive power. Like, okay, you're Muslim, you believe in this and this and this axiom, and therefore, even as a Hasidic Jew
That's
who
sounding
doesn't
a
believe
lot
in
like Claire Kahn, Doovid.
well, I
Varad
think
would
it's
like
just
to know, is
logical.
this just the coherent theory of truth? It sounds like it's just the acceptance of other axioms of a truth statement.
Uh, yeah, sometimes some perspective in human sciences are they take one perspective takes over because of the context of the social time. Like
Well,
during the
usually
'60s.
when an idea is wrong, it tends to take over because it can't stand being in the presence of correct ideas because of how obviously wrong it is. So,
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was more talking about the social context. Like in 1960s, the conflict perspective was just dominant. Anybody that comes in and say, "Hey, look, I'm looking at it from this functional perspective," no, it's not accepted. That's because of the time. I mean, the 60s, it was the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement. The conflict of the Marxist perspective was just dominant. Dominant. I mean, a feminist or a symbolic interaction psychologist come in, no way. But now it's changing. It's sometimes our epistemology, the way we think, is influenced by the social context we live in. We live in now in a time where everything is uncertain, and it doesn't mean that every perspective is valid. It's just a way to look at things. That's all we're about. So if Doovid, you're looking at it multiple perspective only in terms of religion and interfaith, I understand that.
Well, I
But
just
for
wrote my
me,
article on the origins of how I came up with it. And I'm trying to
yeah, yeah.
formalize a universal method. And um, I hadn't heard of what you call it, the multiple foundational hypothesis.
No,
How do you phrase it for
Multiple
sociology?
paradigm perspective, wasn't it?
no, it's called the what do you call, the theoretical perspective, or the approaches, the theoretical perspectives.
Yes, I mean, I had heard of all of those schools of sociology. Like I have a few books on sociology.
Right.
I took, but so I knew that there were those major schools of sociology, and so it's not surprising that a sociologist would your professor of sociology, that you might call yourself from one school, but you would be familiar with all the schools, and for analyzing complex issues, you would use all the major schools of
Oh,
thought in
exactly.
order
Okay.
to
Yes.
understand an
Yes.
issue.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
but saying I was attempting, I was just mentioning that the origins of how I started thinking about it was from interfaith, but I'm attempting to formalize a universal method that you would describe this phenomenon for all fields. That for physics, sociology, interfaith, any of these areas where you have
Well,
uncertainty and multiple perspectives for how you could navigate these systems. And so you as a professor of sociology, like had to navigate multiple schools of thought and use multiple schools of thought
yeah.
to analyze ideas, but you don't have a formalized method to do it. You just know that that's what you're doing, but you don't necessarily have a formalized method to do that.
Oh, well, yeah, it's not formal, but you are bound to choose one perspective in order to do research. If you really tend to be influenced by some of them, not all of them,
I mean, if you
by
were
some of
writing a
them.
paper like that you wanted to get published, you would
But
you
but
would
you have,
develop your school
yeah,
and how
yeah,
you're analyzing the issue, but you would also have to be critical and
sure,
answer how the other major schools might analyze it,
yes,
and
right,
in a professional scientific manner, like as opposed, like Charles's book on sociology of conservatives. He was like, well, that wouldn't be published within he self-published that and promotes and sells his book. It wouldn't be academic to be published as a book on sociology, even though he called it sociology of conservatism, because you would have to do the academic rigor of establishing your method, and then some sort of comparison to other major methods.
right, right. I
And
don't think it passed the American Sociological
well, he's
Association.
not academic like that. I'm
Yeah, it's
saying
not an academic.
he
Yeah.
just called it the
So,
social. But I'm just
yeah,
saying that you as
yeah,
a academic are familiar with that method,
you're
and
right.
even though you don't have like a formalized method, like how you have to publish papers and the method of professionalism and there's various schools, and so but the attempt of the multiple truth hypothesis would be to formalize a universal method that would be usable in all fields.
No fields. Well, good luck on that, because another question, another stuff that I could really ask you to do is to give us look at one topic and see the different view that coming from societies, and try to inject your multiple truth hypothesis to solve this issue. Okay, in terms of like the Noahide laws, or abortion, or whatever. And then and maybe you could really enhance our understanding that multiple truth hypothesis could be applied to different topics, or different events, or different problems in society, because you could look at poverty, for example, from a different three or four different angles, or you ask questions about it from it through 4 or 5 different angles. That's the way it is. So basically, being critical about other perspective is okay. You say, well, this is really doesn't apply because of changing nature of society, the context, the individual experiences. You can say that if you
Yep,
have
I agree.
grown.
You've convinced yourself. Doovid, I've got coherence theory of truth. I don't know if you've heard this up on the screen before, or if you want to make a comment about whether your theory lines up with this or to what extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's in line there. I mean, it's not like I'm the first person to ever think about this. So there's all types of theories or statements similar, but none of them have like a formalized method that would be logical or mathematical. And so I may not even have one, saying I just did the best in complicated situations to strive for truth. And yeah, I mean, so it's, I mean, like similar to what Samish is saying, coherence theory of truth is everyone knows that there's uncertainty and there's a whole bunch of competing theories,
Exactly.
and you can't demonstrate that one of them is conclusively true and the others are false because they all have somewhat of explanatory power.
Power.
And
Exactly.
so coherence theory of truth is some sort of holistic understanding of the nature of truth. And so I mean, it's on the lines of what multiple truth hypothesis is getting at, but it's more a method or a technique.
Right. Or not so much a technique, but a way to ask the question, the research question, by which you arrive at the research questions. That research question is influenced one way or another by the way you approach it. If you approach it from a feminist perspective, your question will be different if you approach it from a conflict perspective. Or if you approach the nature of God from a Muslim perspective and that of the Jewish perspective, it would be different. To me, I don't think people always say that Muslims and Christians and Jews pray to the same God. I don't believe that. How? Why I don't believe that? Okay, we could say, oh, it's all from Abraham. No, it's how we define what God says and what is God. In terms of the Judaism, I mean, the Jewish faith does not prone murder and killing and jihad. So if God says go ahead and kill people, well, in terms of the Muslim, in when you to spread the faith, so therefore the definition of God from these two perspectives is completely different. Therefore, they're not praying to the same God, although conceptually we can say, well, it's the same one. No, it is defined differently. Therefore, it's not the same. To me, I mean, this is my opinion.
Yeah, but now you're mind reading again. That's dangerous stuff that leads to, well, you ought to have done different because you ought to known better because you ought to thought logically. Not a good road to go down.
Maybe you put the axioms to say, okay, well, that we obviously the same God because it's definitionally the same God, that it's the same God of Abraham. So saying like as Jews, our God is like the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and
But
so
yeah,
to say that
sure.
they just accept another prophet in the canon, but the God who spoke to Abraham from the Islamic perspective is the same God who spoke to Abraham. And so if you're looking, well, what did that God said, and based on the dictates that we have in terms of law, does it make a contradiction, and therefore can't be the same God?
Well, yeah,
There's a lot. There's a
but
that,
God
that
can
was
surmount contradictions, I'm afraid, especially puny, logically constructed ones.
yeah. I mean, and so like between Hinduism and so to say Judaism or Islam, there might be much greater contradictions. So like burial versus cremation. I mean, if you're just pointing out one contradiction, like okay, does God allow military expansionism or not? And you say, well, if this system says yes and this system says no, it can't be the same God, which may or may not be valid. But there's many fundamental uh, possibilities, and there's many similar axioms, and there's many different axioms. That's why I talked about comparative eschatology, like what's going to happen at the end of days, or if you want to take like issue, like okay, what's the Jewish approach to abortion, or the Islamic approach to abortion. And you know, maybe in that terms, like the Jewish approach to abortion and the Islamic approach to abortion are largely the same, versus like
Sure.
burial and a whole
Yeah.
bunch of issues. And to have some sort of axiomatic system where you could understand what are the major divergences and what are the implications of those divergences, and to have it in a systematic way. And like obviously you could argue on that point of does Judaism believe in killing for God, and in various things or schools of Judaism, and then it's going to become canonical where to establish authority, where you're going to have, well, what does Judaism say, what does Islam say, what are the axioms that provide the basis to say this is what Judaism stands for, versus a sociological approach, which is you're going to be like structural function. I was mentioning the group strategy, where it is more from evolutionary psychology, but it's probably in terms of structural functionism. That's the religion itself isn't true. Like there is no God who spoke to these people. People follow religion because it provides a structure and function as a
Yeah.
group strategy. And to
Yeah.
say like there's really no difference between people.
Sure.
We just need a group strategy. And for whatever reason, historically, archaeologically, anthropologically, we fell into these group strategies and have a predisposition to follow these group strategies. But group strategies are somewhat malleable. So you could say, okay, well, Israel's a Jewish state where the majority of people don't follow Judaism, um, but there's still some sort of collective group strategy.
Right.
And
Right.
and you could also use sociology to axiomatize it, to say, well, okay, secular Jews or contemporary Muslims don't necessarily follow the axioms of the scripture, but they do follow patterned, um, and it kind of go like what I was talking about mathematics, where it would be a boundary condition. There would be chaos. There would be a large boundary. So, there's a lot of discrepancy and sectarianism within Judaism, but Judaism is within certain boundaries, and
Yeah.
also Islam, and there'll be some sort of crossover, but there'll be some sort of clear boundary of, like a toroid type shape where Islam or Judaism fall into, and there might be more or less overlap in terms of sectarianism. And then, if you want to get really metaphysical of the question, what you like coherence theory, what is the real nature of truth? So it's like, oh, we have no idea as humans what truth is, and how do we do our best to you approach truth, knowing that basically truth is beyond our comprehension. And so the multiple truth hypothesis would propose to be a method of like a scientific method of estimation.
Well, yeah. If you say a scientific method, then I don't know. It has to be applied in some sort of like empirical studies and so on.
Well, ability
So
to make predictions, based
right.
on
Yeah. Well,
axioms, and then those axioms to make predictions. It's like, okay, right, the war in Ukraine, or like Israel,
sure.
we're at war now in Israel, and so if you have a sociological model where it's a decision, like what should we do? Ukraine, Israel, we're at war. What should we do? And so you have a model, you have to act, and so
That's a
there's a practical difference that requires action. India, any of these places where Hinduism, where there's dominant competitive group strategies, like America. Are we a white nation, a Christian nation, a nation of immigrants, a multicultural nation, a constitutional republic? And those axioms might have different conclusions for social policy. And then if you're going to, like economics or politics, to try to say, well, how well is it going to work? And, so you're going to have extremely large amounts of uncertainty, and you need some sort of method to work with the uncertainty. And because of the uncertainties, you're going to have to, well, there's this school of thought and this approach and this approach. And, so you need a method. And that's what I'm trying to get at with multiple truth hypothesis, a method, like specifically the method that I use, but can I use this method that, has been relatively successful for myself across multiple disciplines to formalize into some sort of universal method.
Well, if it's universal, then it has to be applied. It has to be applied again and said, okay, it could be used to explain a certain phenomenon. Then let me ask you a question. If you adhere to this multiple truth hypothesis, then one can argue that what Putin is doing to Ukraine is defensible. That
Well,
is,
it's a
he has his
perspective.
own, huh?
So, like,
He has
there's
his
so
own
much
way of
uncertainty.
defining threats, and that Ukraine was
I
part
don't
of
really
the
want to go into subjects that are going to put the channel in trouble. I have no idea where the
Yeah,
line is
that's
anymore.
yeah, I know, but I'm
So
saying to you that if you
I
take
get
that,
it, but let's not talk about the Russia-Ukraine thing at all. I understand the hypothetical, but I don't even
but
know.
I
haven't
don't
looked into
agree
this.
with that. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with using the perspective, the Russian perspective in terms of what they did. That's just not really right. He should not have gone there. But that's beyond the point. Saying multiple truth
I was just say
hypothesis, and
right
then
and wrong in general, saying like, how do you even know that there's a right or wrong, that
right.
such a phenomenon exists? From an atheistic perspective, right and wrong is a made up idea of religion that, saying that morals, so it's like a nihilist, it's a preference, and there is no um, scientific right or wrong. It doesn't matter what we think is right or wrong because it's not a scientific law, and the universe in reality doesn't operate according to a conception of right and wrong. If you're going to hypothesize that, yes, in fact, there is karma and there is a right and wrong, so okay, maybe they're wrong. And then you say, well, does it matter if they're wrong? And, that's um, important. So if you're talking about politics, you have to take okay, like, God forbid, is might make right, and say, okay, well, it's wrong, but unfortunately, wrong is just a preference that has no power in the material realm, and might makes right. So even though that they're wrong, they're still probably going to win, and so you have to get to the axioms and the derivation of these axioms. Is like, I'm a moral person and I believe in right and wrong, but how do you apply that to politics, and how do you like
Then you
the
have to
concept?
take a huge leap where you have to say the Claire-Cott thesis, which is that people's behavior is dictated by beliefs in a metaphysically primitive way that arises from first principles consistent with logic. You have any idea how hard it would be to establish that?
Yeah, and that's why conflict theory is the main theory of sociology, because you can't establish right and wrong. You could
No, it's
establish maybe statistics that the majority of people, or even systematically, that of these major world religions or philosophies, they think that this is right or wrong, but you can't actually scientifically establish that there is such a thing as um, right or wrong. And so when you have to include that perspective. So if you're analyzing, God forbid, like military conflict, war, you could take a moralistic point of view on it, but then you could take just the conflict theory. There's power, there's different groups that have different amounts of power, and
and
right or wrong has no
yeah,
factor into that. Basically,
sure.
this group has more power and they're expected to win, even if they're wrong. The fact that they're wrong, uh, makes no difference.
Now, yeah, for the conflict perspective, the war is beneficial for the military. What do you call it? Complex. The industrial military complex is really beneficial for a lot of corporations that create armaments and so on. So it's really good for them, So therefore, war is it helps economies sometimes too, but that's kind of like
If you have the benefit of being a psychopath, and say like the 1 out of 50 people that are a psychopath, that that naturally doesn't think in terms of right or wrong. So
right. No,
if you're the 49 out of 50 people that has some sort of moral conception where you think in terms of right or wrong, um, but there is the phenomenon of the psychopath, that is about 1 out of 50 people, that has no conception of right or wrong. It doesn't matter to them. And
yes, right,
so,
right.
can I do it and get away with it, uh, versus, is it right or wrong? And like, okay, God forbid I'm a psychopath. I don't care if it's right or wrong. I just care if I could do it and get away with it. So if you're thinking from, the majority human people who have some sort of good or bad perception at least intellectually, you have to say, well, that's just how I look at the world. You have to understand the hard problem of consciousness and human nature, or a religious approach. Why do I consider? Why do I analyze the world in terms of right or wrong, even though I know scientifically that there may be no such thing? And then you have to recognize the known phenomenon of the psychopath that doesn't see the world in terms of right or wrong, and that you interact in a world where um, studies have shown that psychopaths are more likely to be in positions of power
Right.
and be the ones making decisions.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, I want to move to to discuss a little bit the French election, if you permit me.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought it'd be interesting. I saw it looked like the results came in, and I hadn't heard of the third guy so much. Like Macron, 27%, Le Pen, 24%, um,
Yeah,
uh,
and Mélenchon.
Jean-Luc Mélenchon, 21.5%, and then down fourth, Eric Zemmour with 7%, and then
Right,
a bunch of others with less than 5%. So
right.
um,
So
it'll be a head off. I guess in less than a month will be a one-on-one election between Macron and Le Pen. But
right, right. So basically, in
Jennifer's a
French,
French speaker, but French Quebec. So we have our also French-speaking Samish expert guest to give some insight on what happened today. What does it mean?
what they say in French, like the first round, which they finished today, it says when it's when you choose a you choose a candidate. The second round is when you eliminate candidates. That's a joke. That's really what they say in France. So basically, it all depends how many of the Mélenchon people go to either Macron or Le Pen. According to the models that they've done, Macron is 51% and Le Pen is 49. It's very, very close. It's very close. Zemmour and Pécresse used to be the
Is it
old.
closer than last time? I mean, because last time it was Macron versus Le Pen, also, right? Five
Yes, it
years
was,
ago.
but it wasn't. But it was not so close. It was not so close as 51-49. Maybe it was 55-45. Now it's very, very close. Some people that believe that a lot of people from Mélenchon, which is a former socialist candidate, are going to go to Le Pen, and that's what it is. It's the third person who's holding 21% of the votes. How many of them will go to either Macron or Le Pen? So basically, it could be either one. And one formal conclusion, that France is more divided than ever before. The same thing with the United States. The same thing.
Were there two
It's
factors where you're saying to the socialist going to more to Le Pen
but
in that
exactly. Do you know why?
Macron after 5 years
Do,
has kind of
do,
shown to be in the pocket of the corporations. So
right.
even though and Le Pen has became a little bit more moderate, more less far right wing, so that the
Exactly.
socialists, okay, like Le Pen is like straight away from the extreme right wing and racism of uh of the past, and Macron has demonstrated to be like a big corporate uh,
Exactly.
capitalist. So if you're a socialist, that
Sure.
last
Yeah,
election when Macron was more unknown, you say like
sure.
Le Pen was more toxic. That this time it's more toss up. You're thinking, okay, even if they're not as racist or nationalistic in that way as Le Pen, but they're more anti-capitalist corporate than Macron is proven
Sure.
to be.
Le Pen now has the majority of manufacturing people. What do you call it? The working class. The majority of the old working class between 35 to 65 are all for Macron. These used to be the old socialists. They used to vote socialist. Why? They old. They seen their purchasing power decrease tremendously. Their children cannot find job. It's the same image as in the United States, and most of them are with Le Pen. not because of her tough on immigration. It's all about jobs, security, and democracy. But remember, what cost Le Pen
We're saying like
before
wealth
4 years
inequality,
ago?
like
But
Macron is like
let me
as a
finish.
corporate puppet is
Let me
increasing
finish.
wealth
Let me finish.
inequality.
There's one point. There's one point that Le Pen did not do well in the last election. She was dealing with Brexit. She wanted to leave France. Now she learned her lesson. She backed up on it, and she's really reaping the benefit. French, on general, 75, 85% of the French do not want to leave the European Union. And what helps now Macron more is the Ukraine war, the idea of a strong Europe militarily and economically. So Le Pen is going to, I think she's going to win. I predict that because the more he's going to get more, he's going to go to her and he's going to get maybe a minister post. Le Presse, she's going to go with them because it's the old Républicain, which is
Will
a
she include
center
him?
right.
You're
Huh?
saying she'll include him in the campaign and work together like her niece.
Exactly.
And part of how they brought her down last time was anti-Semitism.
It's
So
anti-Semitism,
if
right?
she brings them more into like it'll be harder to call her anti-Semitic and it'll make her
Yeah, but
less toxic.
yeah, the Zemmour crowd cannot go with Macron. They can't. They can't. They have to go with Le Pen because that's closer to them, closer in terms of voice, ideology. Again, what I'm saying to you is that Mélenchon, which has 21.6% of the electoral vote, that's where that's what's going to decide who is going to go with whom. So it's going to be a lot of coalition dealings and also from now to the 24th of April, if something happened, God forbid, in Ukraine in terms of winning and so on, Macron could get it if he's going to back up. So basically, according to the models, 51-49% for Macron, but it could change. It could really change in a span of 3 weeks. It could change dramatically, and Le Pen could be the next president. I think that's why it's going to go to because people do not want to see the incumbent going back again
We're saying
and
Macron
again.
is it like wealth inequality
Not so
as
much.
like a
It's
corporate candidate that
yeah,
you saying like he's not a socialist and people just feel left behind and the economy prices rising
right,
and they don't have any confidence that even if
right,
France survives that he's leaving behind the masses of the population
right.
and Le Pen will be more in terms of the socialist like nationalist uh, policy like dog whistling or whatever you say like wealth redistribution or anti-corporate policy that Macron has practiced.
Practice, right, right, right. Yeah. So she's using some of the elements of the old socialist verbiage and ideology that could really help her. And I
I mean,
think that's
she's an
why it's going.
unknown, but I was saying, but because she's an unknown, she could just give voice to that make them think that that's what she's going to do to get them
Yeah,
to vote for her, and who knows what she'll actually do and whether she'll actually benefit anybody. But you're saying the people are prices, inflation,
right.
price increase, high gas prices.
Nice prices,
People are
right,
feeling
right.
it, and they're more likely to give the other candidate a try.
That's right. Exactly,
Not necessarily
exactly,
that she has like
exactly.
some
And
sort of plan that's going to benefit people economically. Just to say, well, whatever Macron's doing isn't working. Let's give the other person a try.
right, right. I think that's what
Or do
they're
you think
gonna
she actually does? She
they're
actually have
gonna.
a plan? I'm even following it.
Huh?
You think she actually has some sort of plan, or you think it's just
I'm gonna
it's
I'm gonna be following it up day by day to see. It seems to me like she's going to get some more speed in terms of getting more vote from Mélenchon groups, which were the socialists. And if they are socialists, they see Macron as capitalist, and they are really anti-capitalist, anti-globalist. They're really more institutional, uh, old school socialists in terms of pensions and so on. And they see this as Macron as completely dismantling the old welfare state, and he's trying to do that. He did that. So for the benefit of the whole French society, it's really helping a very few people and not really the large majority of people.
I mean, you can say like, God forbid, there's going to be austerities and the welfare state is going to be dismantled one way or another just
Dismantle.
because
Yes.
of economic problems. But Macron, being practical, is just saying we have to do it and going to do it. So Le Pen will be able to just make promises she won't be able to keep, but that
Sure.
could put her into. And then when she's in power, will the technocrats, the bureaucrats, the big money fall behind her? Do they go all out in favor of Macron, or do they hedge their bets and think that the technocrats will be able to manage the economy under Le Pen, even if she's largely incompetent, kind of like Biden or something like that? If he's largely incompetent, but the technocrats think that under him they'll be able to manage it, which may not be working, but it'll be similar to that in France, where she, because it's a
She
popularity contest, all she has to do is make promises she can't keep to win.
Well, I mean, they could still have advisors like Macron. He himself was really not very well experienced in politics. I mean, he came from, he was a minister,
And he was a banker.
he was a banker. It was really nothing in terms of politics, but he surrounded
Obviously, to
himself
manage
with,
the economy, you would assume that a
yeah,
banker,
he had,
that they would choose, someone without, like, I don't know what her background is, but more nationalistic, radical over a banker. The likelihood that she's going to do better for the economy than a banker is more, is kind of fantastical. If
right,
he's
I
saying
know,
you have to
I,
dismantle the
I,
welfare state because they're going bankrupt,
I
he's
don't,
probably right. But in terms of winning the election, she could just promise to do something that's really impossible, but they'll still lead to victory. Kind of like
yeah,
Biden, he just promised to do something that the experts knew was impossible. But in terms of the election, it didn't matter that the experts said that. Like Bernie Sanders, just promised to give away a bunch of things to a whole bunch of people.
yeah. I think if the election turns to Le Pen, it's not going to be as nationalistic as Trump. It's going to be gearing toward to the center right, to the center right. That's what it's going to go to. I mean, keeping the welfare state as is because of the support of the working class and the poor, and also the intellectual class and the educated class and the younger people, which are all for Mélenchon. Believe it or not, they're not with Macron. So I think
How much
it
it's
doesn't.
like
It actually
America, where
doesn't matter. See, in French
how much
politics,
power does she have over
it doesn't
immigration?
matter of the occupation of a person. Le Pen, she's not really a banker. I think she was just an educator. It doesn't really matter because you can surround yourself with good advisor, with good public service people, that you could do a good job. And you have to look beyond. You have to plan ahead and look at the future and see what you could do, what you can take from one place and then give it to the other. So that's why it's. I don't think that Macron has a it's not going to be the same as the last 5 years. So it's going to be very close, and I think she has more chance than ever now than ever before. So with Zemmour and Mélenchon group, the socialist working class going to her, it's going to tilt the balance. But now apparently it's 51-49. So, but in the next 3 weeks, whatever is going to happen behind the closed doors in terms of coalition building and Ukraine war and any other stuff that might happen, whimsically, it could tilt the balance either way. But it's very, very close, showing yet again that French politics is very, very divided, very divided.
How much
So,
power, if she won, would she actually have over immigration? Would it be like President Trump, where he
yeah,
actually didn't have that much power? The Supreme Court, the courts overruled his ban, and they didn't allow him to fund the wall, or they had
yeah.
power of
But,
Homeland
but
Security or various things, but he was basically stripped of his power to have much of an effect on immigration. Would it be like that in France also, that she wouldn't actually be able to have that much of an effect on immigration, or you think she
probably,
would be
yeah,
able to dramatically change?
probably, but Trump did pass laws, or what do you call it, rules that do not allow any
Executive
Muslim to,
orders.
yeah, orders
Yeah.
that were effective. The group ICE was really effective in going after
We
people
get to the point who's in
who were
charge of the
illegal.
agencies like ICE and Homeland Security
Yeah.
and
So there,
executive orders, but the courts stripped them and the Congress didn't fund it. So obviously there were a lot of deportation and ICE in the law and order made a significant difference that Trump was in office, but
right.
relatively to what he wanted to do, he didn't actually, as president, have the power to do that. And I'm assuming in France it would be similar.
Similar. Yeah, probably it would be similar. I agree
They would
with
be
you.
able
They
to
are.
avoid who's in
Yeah.
charge of the agencies, and they might have more strict enforcement on
Yeah. I have
illegal immigrants and law and order. But
I
in
would
terms
have to
of
look. I would have to
funding
look at
or
that. But she might pass an executive order to stop immigration, all of its freeze it like a moratorium. That's what they're talking about. Moratorium to see how it's going to be, because they do not want to have more people and more people coming in when the economic situation is not doing well. So I'm not so sure. I have to look at that, whether what type of power she would have to implement her policy about immigration. But immigration is really not an issue in the, I mean, rhetorically, when people talk about it, they talk a lot about it, but most French really, they think of it as scare tactics. But still, it's all about jobs and democracy and freedom of speech and so on that really drives the French politics. So it's good. It's next, maybe in 2 3 weeks when we see the result, I'll talk more about it and see what's. I was afraid about Zemmour taking over Le Pen because he didn't like her very much. He said that she's a constant loser, but now he's going to have to really reconsider all those words he made about Le Pen, because he will have to join her if he wants to be in the spotlight, because he certainly do not want to erase himself from the French politics. He's got ambitions. Maybe in the next 5 years, he's going to be taking the reign of Le Pen. If by the time she takes over, he would sway his ideas and cool them down and be more forceful, and people would like him, that he might be a good candidate in 5 years from now.
yeah, I mean, politics just like Biden, like the people got behind Biden, Harris got behind Biden. Now she's vice president, Buttigieg, and the people in the White House, and Zamora, if he wants a future in politics, like he got handed, like he only got 7%,
Right,
and so if he wants a future in politics, he'll have to get behind the pen.
right, right.
And
So
if
that's
he doesn't, I mean, it's unlikely that he'll ever have a future in politics. But if he gets behind her and she wins, then he could have some sort of senior governmental position. If he doesn't end up backing her and she loses, he still might be a radio personality, but the
yeah,
likelihood
yeah,
that he would ever
yeah,
resurface in politics is close to
yeah.
none.
He still have a lot to lot to add to the stuff. Mélenchon, probably this is his last leg in terms of trying to reach out and be a president of the France, but he still has quite a bit of followers. So as a former socialist, is better than others. So we'll see.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have you back. Maybe
Sure.
in a month after elections. And did you have anything else you want to ask
Well,
Samish Jennifer?
I just want to congratulate you on that blog of yours. Like, how many subscription do you have now?
Well, just two. Yeah, I mean, if you want to
Okay,
subscribe, feel free. But
I subscribe to it, but I could not write comments in it. There's no way to write comments in that blog, is it?
I'm not sure. I mean, you could
I
mess.
couldn't.
I read your message. Yeah, I mean, saying subscribing just means you get an email. But
Email, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I'll post them on Facebook, and I'm going to try to get one out each week.
Okay,
Um, and move forward on different aspects of the multiple truth hypothesis, because I'm aiming to write a book called Multiple Truth Hypothesis, and
okay,
and hopefully over the next year or two, if I write tens of articles, I'll be able to turn that in the book.
okay.
So I appreciate your feedback. Is there anything else you want to say to Samish, Jennifer?
No, thanks for coming on. Appreciate everything you contributed to the show. Talk to you.
Thank you very much, and good luck on everything you're doing. You're doing good. Hopefully,
Thanks.
you maybe my suggestion is trying to get Awaken reviewed at least 1 hour on thematic, thematic themes that you allow people to come in and talk. I don't know, politics, art, poetry. I don't know. Just so that way it would be more structured, more vibrant, so to speak, instead of the same old stuff. And
Okay.
good luck on your your lecture that you're doing. Is it's I cannot follow it very well, but again, my point is that if you can be more precise in your definitions and more clear, then that would be good.
I don't know if you saw my last video, but it's a
I saw
start.
that.
So what
I
I'm
s-
trying to do is get definitions together that have a closure. So
Okay.
if you started a definition, you can get back to it and you can understand what it means in the context of all these other words. And you don't need to
Okay.
bring in any other concepts. And I'm hoping that other concepts will lend themselves to this sort of decomposition. But yeah, at the beginning, it would be a bit abstract to start to use. Like, I don't know if you could tell that I was struggling to get those words out when I was doing the video, but
Right.
it's quite
Yeah.
challenging
There's so many
technical
concepts.
vocabulary. But
There's so many concepts that needs to have to be operationally defined. I mean, defined in terms of understanding the concept. No, not using more concept to define other concepts. So that's what it is. So
yeah,
we'll
exactly.
follow
Well,
up.
this is like a starting point, so it's a
Okay.
reference, and I'll build up the definitions from there. But I mean, the
Okay.
thing is that when you're in a path of learning, the impression that you actually have accurate definitions of words, that's something that tends to sort of go away or it dips out temporarily and maybe comes back in a different form. But words only really seem to have precise definitions to a certain point.
Yes. Yes. I agree. I agree.
But yeah, thanks for
Okay,
checking out my
guys.
video. Appreciate it a lot.
All right. Take care. Thanks a lot for allowing me to speak, and good luck. And I will follow you more.
Yeah, happy Passover. Appreciate your presentation and
Passover.
your
Yeah.
feedback.
No
And
problem.
yeah, next week actually could be we might cancel or do the show later because I think Passover
Passover. Yes.
is
Yes.
through Sunday night and
Sunday
won't
night.
until
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
8:30 or 9. But yeah, have a happy Passover also.
Yeah. You too. Thanks.
Okay, Jennifer. So do you want to do your week in review now? Do you have a few things you wanted to cover?
Yeah, thanks. I had a link about that I was, I
You're
don't
like
know how.
all-time small viewership. Maybe it's better that like kind of like your comedy act to the viewership that we get, no one watching, so it could be more serious.
Yeah, no shit. And if you were not such like in a dreadful mood so often, I'm sure we'd have more viewers on the regular. But it's just like, yeah, whatever.
4 people watching and like one of them's me. So hey, no one and like maybe Don, and if Viren is like no one watching, so maybe that's better. Well, I also did a video. I didn't share it. I went to that home and garden show, and I tell like I used to have bigger dreams. But yeah, I think the media personality is not really going anywhere. If you had monetized, it might have taken a different venue. But yeah, if you're not even monetized, like maybe it's better to be more serious, and we'll pump out intellectual content. So it's better that like basically no one's watching. So what do you got?
Article from April 4th. Quantum memristor could enable brain-like quantum computers. And it almost seems to be a tacit acceptance of the mind being a quantum computer. I'm reminded of the "first they laugh at you" quote that I won't even bother finishing. But yeah, I think neuromorphism is the future, and just general, maybe not biomorphism, but nature morphism, understanding the natural aspects of signal processing.
You haven't seen Aiken in the chat for months. I remember he did a thing on Nimristas before. Even informed us about it.
Well, the basic idea is kind of in the name, like, excuse me, it's memory. It has some sort of a memory that it's able to keep past just pure, like, logic gates 0, 1, on, off. So that's interesting. And I don't know if you heard about Jared Leto doing method acting and having to take 45 minutes to go to the bathroom. I was just thinking about high maintenance people in general. And did you hear about this?
No, I don't think so. I don't even know if I recognize this guy at all.
Yeah, I have no idea why this became a thing, but I guess it was a little bit maybe indicative of the culture of narcissism, really. It's really kind of toxic. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. We should be surprised that any behavior is good given all these awful role models. But this one is super interesting. I've been wanting to see one of these for a while. It's a automatic generator of images based on text. I can't remember if I sent this one to you, Doooovid, but I'll throw it in the chat here.
Was that what you made the beach the photo for the This Week in Review with?
Yeah. That was let me see what I call that one. Cosmos made of beach balls. That was my very first one, and it turned out, I'd say, pretty bad. It was the most dumpster fire-ish of them, and then they gradually got better because I was able to see like what were its strong suits. And so as I thought it was kind of cool to do a widely known figure through a widely known artistic person, or sorry, artist's modality. So this is Picasso Krishna, for example. It's not great, but it's something rather interesting. I've got a whole bunch of them. They're not all. I just like was pushing sort of whatever boundaries I thought I could find on it, you know? So I put in True Love, and it was pretty funny because this one looks like she's about to kill that guy. And this is funny too because their faces look like they're just merging. So I don't know if everyone else finds compression artifacting as interesting as I do, but there you go. Links in the chat if anyone wants to check that out. I had minutes of fun with this earlier. Would you consider putting words into that to be a bad use of time?
Not sure. I mean, maybe it doesn't interest me that much. I mean, the technology, but you know, I guess if you like making memes, it could you know, be interesting to see how the computer would. But I mean, not particularly interesting to me. But
I'm interested in art for its own sake to a large degree, but also want to see if I can brute force to some extent through repeated iterations and understanding almost on an intuitive level of what the algorithm is doing. And it's really hard in some cases, but I guess putting painting of blah, blah, blah sort of smooths it out. So
yeah, I used to share some of these. I forget the name of the YouTube, you know, about your papers on machine learning and language processing, and had stuff on images also. So I mean, you mean it's one of the new directions in so to say machine learning and your manipulations of images, reading and understanding images is you know, definitely one of the you know, main directions of computers these days. in machine learning specifically.
Did you say images?
Yeah,
Image
machine learning
processing?
related. I mean, you know, we talk a lot about the science of consciousness and perception, but you know, specifically machine learning and images. So there's natural language processing, referring to oral or written language, and then there's image processing. So for machine learning, image processing is one of the biggest fields. Um, you know, I mean, probably natural language processing is from the biggest disciplines, but you know, image processing is definitely up there, and you know, so that's mostly in how do computers understand images and take meaning from images, but it'd be the reverse also to how do computers generate images.
Well, people generate images, Doovid, generally, and cameras, not computers.
Well, I mean, well, you're showing that you could enter, you could have computer generated images based on keywords or various things. Um, and those technologies are neater and more interesting. But you know, from the relation to the hard problem of consciousness, cognition, perception, and just computer programming, like driverless cars, is how do computers understand images? How can computers perceive the environment around them? And you know, if it's for useful devices like driverless cars, or for you know, some sort of perceptive ability, you know, like facial recognition technology, um, or the various things where you know, just how does a computer look at an image and ascribe meaning to it to understand what it is that it's looking at.
It doesn't ascribe meaning to it.
Well, because that's an morphization, but you know, from the computer uh, processing, understanding how does the computer decipher what is in the image, and you could classify, like, I mean, the computer does describe meaning to it, because you I mentioned the other day, like the false assumption that computers don't have intelligence. Computers use intelligence. It's not like human intelligence. And if you're just playing around with words, but say, no, my computer ascribes
You're
meaning.
playing around with words to ascribe an intention to a computer, but
No,
okay.
because you're caught on the computers don't have intention, but you're implying that these words
If
ascribe
they do,
intention.
it's a highly anthropomorphic concept that I question why you'd want to use such a subjective, emotionally laden term in such
Because
a
I speak in
cold
the
technical
language of
subject.
men. So I mean, if you want to actually get into the code and how the code does it, and you know, to give to
I'd be
speak
looking
through a
for
formula, to speak
artifacting
through code,
patterns that I could notice across many images.
we are saying to a pattern recognition, if you just want to call that ascribing meaning, that if a computer recognizes a pattern and attaches a definition to it, um, that's ascribing meaning, and you're anthropomorphizing by interpreting the word in the human sense. But saying, no, the computer does ascribe meaning, and you're just implying the human understanding of what those words mean when we use it as humans. But in essence, the computer is doing the same thing, because the way that humans go about perception is, in all likelihood, very similar to the same to how computers go about perception. Like when we look around and recognize a shape or an object, and so to say, ascribe meaning, that um, you know, so to say, the maybe humans don't have intention either. It's just a process in our brain that does that. And so to the computer ascribes meaning to an object in the same way that the mind does. And you just say, well, maybe the mind has intention, maybe it doesn't, but the mind ascribes meaning to objects. And now computers are getting better and better at doing the same thing, even better than humans. You know, you would just say
Or you
that's a
can just call
mushroom.
it all pattern recognition, and then you're not stuck with that weird thing about thinking that computers are some sort of god that can tell you unbiased, objective information.
Yeah, I mean, you're taught on some sort of lesson. I'm just using words to describe a phenomenon, and if you think a computer could recognize that that's a mushroom, and I'm using ascribe meaning, that if the computer says that's a mushroom, the computer is ascribing meaning by saying that that's a mushroom. And
It has a lot
so
more information than just mushroom. It's about the image as a whole being compressed into a matrix. So what
yeah,
the
so if the
computer has
computer could
access
look
to
at
is in the
that
form of a
and
matrix.
classify it as a mushroom, it's ascribing meaning. And so
We
you're
ascribe meaning to
making
what
the
we perceive as
fallacy.
mushrooms in reality, and we're ascribing potentially the same meaning to these generated images, and that meaning is generated by us.
Well, the meaning is it's a mushroom, and ascribing
That's
meaning
right. And to the
is
computer, it's not a mushroom. It's just a shape, or it's just the result of a computation.
yeah, but that could be our brain too. There's no reason to think
No,
that our
it couldn't.
brain. Well, it is. I mean, that's the hard problem of consciousness.
Well, you're saying it could, and I'm saying
you're following.
no, it
I
couldn't.
mentioned this a few weeks ago. You're making the fallacy that computers use intelligence. They just have,
You're the one who
if you're
said
saying
that
the
they use
difference is
intelligence.
intentionality, and the reality is you can't even show that humans have intentionality. So if you're just looking at whatever this is, it's a mushroom. You can't actually demonstrate that there's a difference, with the hard problem of consciousness between what happens in the human mind when I ascribe meaning, saying that that's a mushroom, versus when a computer ascribes meaning, saying that's a mushroom. And to some extent, it could be the exact same process where the computer takes the image and ascribes meaning, calling it a mushroom, and when we see the image and ascribe meaning, calling it a mushroom.
It's not calling it a mushroom, though. It's receiving commands to generate a mushroom and taking meta mushroom information from training data and recreating it.
Yeah, but that's in all likelihood what's happening in our mind also.
Right, and you're saying there's an
So I'm
analogy
not
to be made there.
anthropomorphizing, is saying
You
that
don't
it's
plug in
actually
a
the same
human.
process in our mind, that when we use the term ascribing meaning, it's not actually unique about the human mind and functioning, and it's replicated by the computer. And the process that our mind uses is actually probably very similar or the same that the computer using. So when you say, what does it mean to ascribe meaning, that the computer does the same thing that our brain does. It ascribes meaning. You don't need intention because you can't even demonstrate that humans or the brain has intention. If I see this picture and I classify it as a woman in a crown, I may or may not have had intention. That could have been an involuntary reaction of pure processing in my brain.
All you can establish is that you recognized a pattern. That doesn't mean you're somehow analogous to a calculator.
I ascribed meaning. I took an image and I ascribed meaning by clarifying a definition of what I'm seeing. Meaning, a word. I ascribed a word, definition, meaning to an image. There's no difference where I say that the computer ascribes meaning. I don't know what you're getting at.
You wanted to anthropomorphize the computer. I'm just going to keep saying, look, I can describe it as pattern recognition. The computer has no concept of what a mushroom is. On any centralized level, we can identify mushrooms very quickly because we have a centralized pattern recognition facility, which is different to any computer that's built with transistors. They're disanalogous. You want to say they're the same? I'm going to say that's special pleading.
I didn't say this. I said the ascribing meaning process is the same.
We don't have any way to confirm that a computer has any way to discern, quote, meaning. It can notice patterns through computations in inputs set by humans,
but
I don't see where that translates to meaning.
Meaning is saying, what's the meaning of a mushroom? When the computer sees an image and it can say, this is a mushroom, it ascribed meaning.
So there's a difference between something as an identifiable thing and the meaning of something. I'm wondering why you seem to be trying to make them the same.
Ascribing meaning is why I said, okay, if we ascribe meaning to what a mushroom is and then recognize it, and it's unclear whether we even.
You have no idea how it works.
Well,
how mushroom meaning arises from where? Well, you're completely just guessing at this point.
Well, that's the Platonic form.
On what? Based on what? Okay, so Platonism, how do you prove that? You can't. You can't prove what the objects are.
We may not have ascribed meaning to the mushroom. The category existed independent of the human mind. We just recognized the pattern, and you ascribed a word that fits whatever this category is, like a mushroom or a woman. And so the computer could do the same thing.
We're both capable of pattern recognition. To then say that that means that we're both interpreting meaning when meaning is such an obviously subjective, emotion-laden concept, and then to say, well, the computer's doing that too, that sounds like special pleading to make it sound like the computer has a special unbiasedness that it really doesn't, because it can only do what humans tell it to.
That's completely irrelevant. Just like our brain could only do what it's wired to do, or like JF, like genetic determinism. Doesn't matter.
So according to that, no one ever got enlightenment then, or enlightenment isn't a substantially different state of mind than non-enlightenment.
You're trying to forward some sort of preaching or something that's irrelevant to what I'm saying. That if the computer recognizes a form, I'm using the word describing meaning, and saying that's not an anthropomorphication, because those words have technical understanding that doesn't necessitate that it's a human doing it. And it's saying, what is computer intelligence? And saying that the computer recognizes a form and describes it a name. And the name has meaning because the meaning is a form. And so just because the human does it also, and whether the human uses the same process of the computer is irrelevant. The computer does the same thing that the human mind does.
How come I feel different when
it doesn't matter how you feel?
A picture is being destroyed versus a real thing? If there's no difference, and all I'm doing is recognizing.
I didn't say there's no difference. You're saying that there's a human and a computer. Of course, they're different. We're saying the process. We're abstracting to the process. I'm talking about a meta
and it's
level.
Completely an unfounded assertion.
And the human process and the computer process is analogous.
This is the whole point of going into philosophy, is to remove the emotional language. And you're saying, why don't we just use this term because maybe it's not wrong? I'm saying, let's use the one that's maximally correct, which is pattern recognition. The computer can recognize a pattern. It's actually even hard for us to say how the computer does that, but we can get an intuition with how row reduction of a matrix works, and that's somehow imposing a level of order through lower triangulation or whatever, diagonalization. But if you start saying it's describing meaning, you're saying, well, we don't have an answer to the hard problem of consciousness, so let's shift it into computers, another system that we hardly understand, and maybe that'll make it easier to conceptualize. It's a synthetic machine.
You're saying something that isn't adding. Everything is pattern recognition. Everything that the computer does, everything that the human mind does. And so just saying,
then you could also say everything is ascribing meaning, but at least with pattern recognition, you can say, well, what's a pattern? It's degrees of self-reference that you can actually measure. And you want to hone in on something measurable as easy as possible. Like ideally you want non-interferential measurement.
When I log into my computer and it uses the facial recognition for me to log in, it's an ascription of meaning. It's more than, it's pattern recognition. Of course, it's all pattern recognition, but it's larger than that. It ascribes meaning, that it takes the image of me and says that's me. It ascribed meaning that it took the image that it processed,
or it identifies the pattern called the pattern that it has saved as you.
It ascribed meaning, this thing, that's me. Just
no, it identified a pattern. It didn't describe any meaning. Ascribing meaning requires some sort of centralized intelligence, but for some reason you want to sweep over that.
You're playing around with definitions, like
projection.
Now you're giving some false definition of meaning. That's not the
projection
definition
again,
of meaning.
I'm afraid.
No,
what a word means is partially how people understand it. Most people understand meaning to be something that is emotional.
Now you're giving most. How do you know what most people? You can't even define meaning.
How do I know?
You're arguing nonsense for no reason. That's why no one's watching, and it's not interesting.
So this appears to be deflection from the quality of your own position here. Can you accept that most people wouldn't agree that a human mind functions at all like a computer and that it's unintuitive?
Yeah, you're making worthless statements. You're saying not at all. The human mind functions in many ways very similar to a computer. There's differences, and there's intelligence, and certain things that we understand from intelligence are the same between a computer and a human. Like, of course, they're not the same. There's similarities. If we're talking about the ability to ascribe meaning, and they say that a computer intelligence can ascribe meaning.
All right. Well, that's the
It
type
doesn't
of
matter that
language
it's
to keep on
programmed by
using.
a
If you want to
man.
make sure you never understand how anything works, just keep on using that kind of language. Keep wading into highly emotional language, and you'll be very
There's no emotion here.
non-learning-ish.
Saying you're trying to make some point that's irrelevant, like, and that's why no one's even watching.
I think that's largely to do with your sour attitude, which would be nice if you could curtail it, as I'm entertaining what I feel is quite a strange idea, which I already entertained for 3 hours with that guy, about how it's basically the same argument as DNA is a code. You're saying mind is like our subjectivity. Have you ever noticed a problem with anthropomorphism anywhere else? Do you think anthropomorphism is an actual issue?
Yeah, it's an issue, and it's saying like you could bring it up, but it wasn't what I was doing.
You can
I mean,
claim
it's
that, but
meaning.
you don't
What
have
is
the
meant
evidence
by a
on your
word,
side.
text, concept, or action? If you add to that image, intended to communicate something that is not directly expressed.
Exactly. So you're saying you're confusing content and meaning.
I'm not
I would
conflating
say it's
anything.
the content of the image.
What the hell I'm not conflating anything. I don't need your corrections. I said that the computer ascribes meaning. I'm sticking with that. I don't know what the hell point you're trying to make.
I already made it. Precise technical language is the way to understand.
You didn't. You just made some bullshit definition. They said most people think that's no. I want a technical definition. And saying a technical definition, it ascribes meaning.
Yeah, you just defined the term meaning. You said something, whatever. It was obviously emotionally connected. I need to look it up.
No
Or
emotion, saying what is meant by a word, text, concept, or action.
Yeah, which is usually chock full of emotion.
No,
if you look at a picture of your mom,
there's
are
no
you
connection.
really
You don't need
emotion there?
emotion to have meaning. Ascribe, to attribute something to a cause.
Yeah, meaning. What is meant by a word, text, concept, or action? Self-reference. Meaning is the all-encompassing thing. It's the whole thing.
Meaning something meant or intended. So saying with
Yes,
the computer.
intention. Is it a good idea to ascribe an intention to a computer?
No, the computer doesn't have the intended meaning of the picture is the mushroom. So if the computer could recognize that's a mushroom, and you could put the image into in front of a computer, and the computer says that's a mushroom, the computer ascribed meaning.
You ascribed
to a
meaning,
definition,
the
what the
computer
computer
ascribed
did.
meaning. I agree with
If
you.
the computer sees a picture of me and it recognizes that it's me, it ascribed meaning to the data. The data set was me, and it ascribed meaning by correctly identifying that it was me, by correctly identifying that the image was what it was.
I'm not even sure if you actually heard my point, even though I made it twice. Now, I can't tell, do you agree with the removing emotional language from philosophy concept?
I mean, generally, I mean, emotion is something that needs to be addressed by philosophy, but no, I don't see meaning as having any connection to emotion.
It doesn't have the most connection that it could, but it doesn't have the least. And if it's connected to intention, eloquent, expressive, and pregnant connotation.
Meaning does not have any does not have to have any connection at all. If I say that X equals chair, that's the meaning. There's no emotion. If I say that 440 hertz equals the sound equals the note A, there's no emotion to that. It's a meaning. That's the meaning. That's the definition.
Right. What's the meaning of love? Chock full of emotion. So when people remember terms, they're remembering them through the emotions that evoke them.
Yeah, but now you're speculating on some of the hypernomic consciousness that
Yes, I'm
if you're saying that
speculating.
if people have an emotive connection related to words, that's possible because the mind's connected in an emotive center, but unlikely. You're saying that if
What's unlikely is your little computer consciousness LARP. What I said is
I
perfectly
did not say
reasonable.
computer consciousness. I mean, you have some sort of nonsense that you're trying to forward, and you just can't understand something simple. It's like
Well, what are you
tiring.
saying then? You keep saying the human mind is like this computer's because it's ascribing meaning, and you haven't established that at all.
I didn't even necessarily say the human mind. I saying that the human can ascribe meaning to objects, and the computer could ascribe meaning to objects. The process that the human mind uses is possibly different than the computer uses, but it's an observable phenomenon. Like if I see a circle, there doesn't have to be any emotion. I recognize that this is the shape, this is the color. I ascribed meaning. I looked out my window and I recognized objects. I ascribed meaning to the information that was coming in. And saying that yes, a computer could do that also. Maybe it has implications to understanding how the mind works. It's really psychometric that that how the computer does it or how the mind does it. We have the psychometric data that a person could observe something and ascribe meaning to what they observe in the same way that a computer now could. And I said it's one of the cutting fields of machine learning could look at an object and ascribe meaning to it, that they could recognize an object and ascribe meaning to it. Like if it's for driverless cars,
They can
that
recognize an object. What does it add to say that they can ascribe meaning? Can't we just stick with the computer can recognize and label an object and stop there? Why do we now have to go to ascribe meaning?
because that's what is recognizing an object is ascribing meaning.
You're making that equivalence. I don't know
When
why.
recognizing an object, just saying this is the same object that I've seen before, is just recognizing an object. Recognizing an object and giving it a label that has meaning is ascribing meaning. Because if you recognize, like a circle or an object, if you just say, "Oh, I've seen this before," that's recognition. If it's, I've seen this before, and this is a fill in the blank, that's a meaning.
And in your own body, those are anchored to emotional
I,
triggers.
well, yeah, and the human mind is probably related to, and the computer is not, but both ascribe meaning.
Meaning is attached to the emotional
So
triggers, is my point, because
if
we
I
make
see you and
meaning
recognize
through
you,
pattern
that has an
recognition.
emotional connection. If the computer sees you and recognize you, it doesn't have an emotional connection, but it's still
Exactly
the
why
it's still the ascription of meaning.
saying that it is describing meaning is the same mistake as saying that it is feeling something about it or
Yeah, I
seeing
mean,
the image.
I mean, it's just your stupid nonsense. It's just like tiring and boring. I don't need your correction, and saying you haven't even made a definition to say I need correcting. This is how I'm defining. I'm sticking to it. It's called ascribing meaning, and you're saying like I need some sort of correction, and it's really just your stupidity. Like you're like the words. What words do you not understand? If the computer recognizes an object and classifies that object, it's ascribing meaning. The fact that you understand something in terms of human nature and emotion is pointless. You're just playing stupid word games. It doesn't advance anything.
Well, some people might disagree that knowing how emotions work in the context of memory is useless, but you're
It
free to
is
your own
useful.
opinion.
I didn't say it's useless. I said it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. And just because in
You
your own
don't
head
agree with me,
that
that's
when I
fine.
say the word ascribing meaning, you have some sort you keep on thinking emotion as saying no, ascribing meaning does not imply emotion. And when a computer recognizes an object and classifies that object according to a definition in an emotionless way, it's ascribing meaning. And just if the human mind does it, it ascribes emotion. And you also would call that ascribing meaning. It doesn't mean that the term doesn't equally apply in both cases.
So Dark Matter and Battle Rap's giving us some words of encouragement, saying the lot of shows started from the ground up. And that it's something I actually have to go back a bit. Yeah, I've seen YouTube shows start from the ground up. Holding around 10 people is strong. Be sure to engage with your chat and be creative and fun. I appreciate your show. Thank you for saying that, and we'll catch the playback. Yeah, if there's ever questions, I might not get to them right away, and you may have to re-ask them, but we are happy to entertain them. And I'm not sure how this started, but I guess we're talking about how to improve an understanding of computational models, hypothetically, and wondering whether you had
You
any
showed an
evidence for
image,
anthropomorphism being a
and I
bad
was
thing.
talking about the development of machine learning, and I used the expression ascribing meaning, and then like you thought I needed some sort of like lesson in correction, and it just got irritating. We spent like 15 minutes talking about the definition of words. And it
That's a
just
great
seemed,
summary, but I was asking a question. So if you want to move on from this conversation you allegedly hate so much, maybe answer the question. Is anthropomorphism a bad thing or a good thing? And what's the worst example of it? Or just no commentary on anthropomorphism?
good or bad. Occasionally, it could be. I mean, if you say it's a necessity of the human mind, that the human mind has to anthropomorphize, and that's a limiting capacity of the human mind, or if you say or there's levels that the human mind is capable of understanding abstract ideas without anthropomorphization, and then in many cases, it's a negative thing because it detracts from the true meaning of what's going on.
Well, that's the whole thing, is that it doesn't detract from the meaning. All meaning comes from anthropomorphism. Don't get mad at me. That's just a fact of language. I didn't build the language here. Okay. I'm just saying. But yeah, good point. Traditionally, we consider it to be bad to have a subjective bias on the self, at least to the point that we would want arbitrary access to the personal self at will. To be able to enter the personal self state at will is quite nice. Yeah, so that would come from reversing any type of vestigial anthropomorphic tendencies. And we may not have access to how to do that right now, but I'm just concerned about doubling down on what may be anthropomorphic tendencies. And maybe I should make that clear. And I went too many steps ahead, but yeah. I still think the conversation was worthwhile, but you know, has anyone looked at this, like the possible anthropomorphism in science or math or something? Like, it's just one of those things that a topic that I've never heard discussed. So like, I don't know, is another one is the connection between math, logic, and computers.
Yeah, I mean, it's related to the question of empiricism, and I mean, that some would express it in terms of anthropomorphization. This thing that because of any observation in general has an anthropomorphizing factor of the empiricism, that it's viewed through us. It's more in religious text, Islamic, Judaic text on idol worship, where anthropomorphization could be considered forbidden.
That's not
as a form.
anthropomorphism forbiddens. That's
What
idolatry.
is saying that's where
forbiddens.
it's most discussed in Kabbalistic Islamic literature about idol worship, and anthropomorphization of God is considered a form of idol worship. So when you talk about God, if you anthropomorphize God, that's borderline, that's could be considered the forbidden act of idol worship, just to anthropomorphize God. And so the sages talk about, similar to the scientific problem of empiricism, of the limitations of the human mind, and say factually that the human mind could only understand God through anthropomorphization. In fact, on the Titans TV, that they were asking about the anthropomorphization of God in the Hebrew scripture, and the Talmud uses the expression that the Bible talks in the language of man, saying that the Bible uses anthropomorphization not because it's accurate if it says God has a mouth or God speaks, not because God does those things, but because the Bible talks in our own language. So there's actually a significant amount of text, and ironically, even offline with those, I don't know if they're Black Israelites or just Pan Africanists that were, we argued about anthropomorphization for hours in the Bible, and they asked me like question after question about, what the Bible says that God speaks, or that God has hands, or that, whatever various case that. But the sages, Maimonides and the Guide to Perplexed, and the Kabbalists go into detail about this limitation of the human mind and capacity to understand God, and what in the word, I mean, I forget in Hebrew what they would use, but anthropomorphization largely derives from this theological context of how we understand God, and anthropomorphization usually refers to God, that people anthropomorphize God, and because God is impersonal, at least from the Judeo-Islamic perspective, and perfect and beyond understanding. And when we try to understand God, we limit uh, God by anthropomorphizing God. I mean, it's a Greek word, I think.
Well, I think it's just a general tendency to ascribe human attributes to non-human things, and the context in which you hear about it most is
Tendency or limitation. That's what I said.
religion and God specifically as the anthropomorphic being.
Well, because idol worship being forbidden, that's why it's talked about so much. Because you're saying if it's a capital offense to anthropomorphize God, you have to be extremely careful not to do it. So, like Jennifer just saying, "Oh, you're anthropomorphizing the computer," um, and your versus saying like you're anthropomorphizing God, you're an idol worshiper, and now you have to be put to death. And so it is strict like that. So the Islamo-Judaic text talk about it in depth because it could be a capital offense like that to anthropomorphize God, and so we have to understand what and say if it's a limitation of the human mind, and there's nothing you could do, and that the only way we could understand something is through anthropomorphization, um, or
It's not
like,
just God, it's everything.
well, yeah, I mean, and the anthropomorphization process could be about anything. I'm just saying
It's
that
just projection, really.
historically, it's historically the literature is saying like you asked if anyone talks about it, say yeah, that's one of the most widely written subjects in Islamo-Judaic philosophy, referring to the anthropomorphization of God, specifically because of the
I think you mean
prohibition of
idolatry.
idol worship, and that the anthropomorphization of God could conceivably be a violation of idol worship. So it's talked about at great length historically in text written well over 1,000 years. Even in the Talmud talks about the anthropomorphization of God. The Talmud asks about these theological concepts, like whether God has these features and if whether that's idol worship.
Are you able to talk about anthropomorphism in any other context?
I guess I mean you aren't talking about it in terms of anthropomorphizing the computer, and then you
Well,
asked
you
if
could
you
start with something like vestigial, where people become paranoid through evolution because it was you were more likely to survive if you heard a sound in the bush and you thought it was a snake, but it wasn't a snake. So I guess you could call that over perception, or a false positive in a perception.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's anthropomorphizing. I mean, if you want to say
That is
free,
the ground of anthropomorphism. It's saying, oh, there's something that may share my intention and my proximity. Dangerousness.
yeah, but it's not. I'm saying that's anthrop doesn't necessarily just mean human, but if you say ascribing human understanding to other, you say, well, no, I mean the snake is also a living animal and has many of the same intentions that so like danger. So if you say like a cat or a dog, that you could anthropomorphize a cat or dog, but to large extent, something like fight or flight or emotions are common between animals. So I don't know if that would be false or even a snake, like a snake, the reptilian brain that say, is the snake scared? I don't know if snakes have fear, but I mean, I think the reptilian brain, that fear would be something in a snake also. So if that's not an anthropomorphization, that's accurate, because it's a common feature, just like I was saying, between the computer. Intelligence is something that's shared in common between the computer and man, even though the nature of how intelligence works in a man is different than a computer, or how intelligence arises, whether it's programmed or however it derives in man. So too, emotions and aspects of decision making and perception are similar and comparable between man and animal, man and other species like a reptile.
It's a lot easier to draw comparisons between us and animals than computers, I'd say. And in case of animals, it really depends on the animal. Like, I don't really think we can say any animals are anywhere near as complex socially as we are, at the very least.
That a formal definition of intelligence. So we say, okay, it takes intelligence to make a calculation. The computer could make a calculation that's intelligence. And so intelligence is the proper description of what the computer does. It's not an anthropomorphization of the computer to say the computer uses intelligence, because it's the proper
So,
definition.
give me some
It's the
examples of
proper
intelligent things then. What is intelligent other than a computer and humans?
Well, I mean, presumably all life, anything that makes good decisions
And you
or
don't think that's
calculations.
anthropomorphism because now you're saying all life plus computer because reasons.
Well, because intelligence is a concept that's separate than the humans. Humans possess intelligence. Humans are not the unique possessors of intelligence. So computers, if you want to use the word possess or have the attribute of intelligence, it's not an anthropomorphization, because intelligence isn't uniquely human.
But you couldn't give an example of anything intelligent that wasn't alive.
Wasn't a lie, like a calculation.
That's the whole thing. Other than the calculator computer, you can't point to anything else that's intelligent and not alive. And I'm saying that's the definition of anthropomorphism. You have this set of things, all those things that you've called intelligent are alive, and now you're adjoining one thing to the set, which is a computer.
Well, possibly. I mean, you could possibly define intelligence to the other non-physical, inorganic substances, so to say, have intelligence. Or, but even if you said that intelligence is unique to living beings and computers.
Yeah, so you see how it's really not very sort of falls
maybe
apart.
maybe even mechanical devices.
So now you want to say that, like, one of those things that you stretch out carpets on to roll them up, that's intelligent.
It depends how you define it. If
Yeah, exactly. This is coming back to the definition problem and what I mentioned earlier, which is, do you want the definition to converge on something measurable, ideally non-interferentially?
But so it doesn't have to be a unique aspect of the computer mind, of the human mind. So you say that if it's a tool that just serves a use, that may not be intelligence. If you're saying a calculation or to the ability to get a use out of something. And but I mean, classically, you say how we've defined intelligence. The computer uses intelligence. The computer is intelligent.
Or the human programmed it to be intelligent.
That doesn't matter. Even if the computer programmed it to be intelligent, it's still intelligent. Doesn't matter that it was the
That's
human
the thing, that it's not intelligent if it's just an emulator. Like, is a flashlight intelligent because it can shed light? No. It's a machine that does that predictably based on its structure.
Well, I was saying if you had a light that turns on automatically in the dark, that's an example of intelligence. The fact that
An example of why computer isn't intelligent.
if a human made the machine, this thing, the machine, the device like a nightlight is intelligent because it perceives whether it's
Because
light or
it has a
dark.
sensor in it? I don't think so.
What I mean, you're just playing around with words. You're the one who's anthropomorphizing.
I'm getting us out of the anthropomorphism problem, and you're projecting. It's like,
I mean,
this is part of the process.
impugning intentions. It's just dumb. And that's why we're not getting anywhere. That's why no one's watching. It's just dumb.
Stop. You're upset because we have to define a term accurately. It's like every philosopher for all time has had to do this. The answer is already out there. Whatever. If you don't see why this is necessary for philosophy and you think it's antagonistic, I don't even know what to say to that, frankly.
Well, I was saying you're impugning intentions. You're not defining words. You're impugning intentions.
That's an emotional reaction. That would probably just be
Well,
better
I'm
left
human,
unsaid,
it's
because it's
emotional.
not true. I'm just asserting facts here based on your poor behavior. So let's keep it on topic, and I'll stop with the digressions and how shitty the show is. It's like, we have to define terms. If you want to stop at intelligence, that's where it's going to stop. But if you want to keep going, we can. But you have to understand it's part of the process. If you don't think it is, fine, but it is. So I already have an answer for this, but I don't need to say it if it's just going to be you thinking I'm posturing. And Dark Matter says, clearly defined terms are always important. Yes, but definitional self-reference, we can't clearly define terms. So when we're starting out, all we have is the impression of clearly defined terms. That's all. Then science has a bunch of results that it gives us, quasi-inductively. That doesn't mean we have clear definitions of terms or precise definitions. I don't want to say anthropomorphism, that's subjectivity. That's what the subjective bias does, is it makes things seem real, that there's a utility to them seeming real. So that's like the default position, basically, is emotionalism. When we would start, the presumption is that everyone is basically in an emotional state, or a state that is easily roused to emotion. And then by exploring these questions, I suppose one gets used to the standard reaction that the ego throws at you, and then it just doesn't matter to regress into the definitions to the point where the language, what you have to get to is realizing directly what the limitations of language are. Now, just one incursion into this exercise, the definitional self-reference problem, where you look up word and then you look up all the words in the definition and keep going, and realize that at some point it's either going to cycle back on itself. If you're in a dictionary, can it keep going back forever type thing? But whatever, it always ultimately comes back to the hard problem of consciousness. Where does what is become what appears to be, which has notions about oughtness bound up in it on a level that have no reason to be self-evident for a beginner? So someone asked in the chat about function being close to intention. Now, you got to be careful when you're doing definitional regress. You don't want to regress into uselessness. This is a problem they have with quantum computers, some sort of plateau. I forget the term exactly, like computational plateau, where they're just useless. We don't want to do that with definitions. We want to see where's the rubber hitting the road. Fundamentally, it's about measurement, but it's not measurement putting a ruler to something. It's measurement as in interfering with the system. What does it mean to perturb a system sufficiently much as to obtain information that we eventually, you know, through all of our senses piled up on top of each other, recognize as, say, a mushroom. So, all that to say, you know, I do appreciate the chance to talk about it, and I hope with time you see the value of it, because these are to me, they're kind of, I don't want to say the best conversations, but the ones where the stuff happens are, I think, the most convincing. Yeah.
You want to wrap up? You got anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I put up my movie that I'm working on about applying that video that I made. We shouldn't really talk about, but did you have any comments about it, or video that I just made?
Yeah, I watched it twice. I mean, and like you shared that meme with me before. I don't know if you posted on your blog, but I mean, you definitely shared that. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting framework. It's definitions, like whether it's leading anywhere, or it's like, okay, like, so what? You know, like, is that you know, if you're claiming that that's some sort of conclusive framework, that, like, what does it do?
I'm not saying it's conclusive framework. I'm saying that it's a way to decompose matter on a mechanical level. So, of all the ways you could decompose matter, because I'm starting with non-dualism, right? So basically any type of decomposition is arbitrary. Now, not all arbiters are created equal, right?
You could put up the image even.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I'll do that right now. I should have done that before. I was just doing so many things and kind of excited to use it. I've got this model idea thing where I'm going to superimpose relational structures on top of the Cartesian plane and exclude the zero. Essentially, because there's like 3 pseudo-independent uncertainty relations. But if you have a single triple zero, which was the case in the Cartesian plane, okay, you're basically losing, what's the word? Like, you don't have the right number of zeros, quote unquote. That's probably just said not quite right, but
You can't get the image up.
I'm getting it up. It's just taken a while, you know. I mean,
I don't know.
this never happens, I swear.
Well, unfortunately, it seems to always happen, but you gotta...
I've got it up now. I'm ready to go. So the idea is distinctions. How many distinctions are there that are meaningful? And the place to draw from is periodic table, 7 rows. This has 7 decompositions. Things tend to trend towards 7 or 4. Now, obviously, you got some systems that are 5, et cetera, et cetera. It really just depends what you're doing. So because this is, I don't want to say everything, but it's a decomposition. So back to what I was saying earlier about the starting with non-dualism. Yeah, okay. Where do you go from that? It's, okay, well, what's the best way to understand matter as a machine? Is that the only way? Is that the only question in existence? Like, no, it's not. Even if other questions lend themselves to this decomposition, it's going to be far from the best one. But for what it is, for the rubber hitting the road, because what we want is to deal with the measurement stuff and observation stuff and take our own consciousness out of it, right? By modeling everything as a machine, then it's a lot easier, because the machine is one of the least anthropomorphic identities. So these would be layers. So each time there's a line, it's sort of understood to be happening to the same thing as another level of abstraction, which doesn't have to, but can involve observation. And what observation is fundamentally is connected to interference, because everything's being modeled as waveforms, which are things that have a 3+1 dimensional geometry, but you can do you can do projections. So you have the shape as it is, which is a 3+1 dimensional thing, which is really cool and everything, but it's hard to visualize. So then you just project that, like in my example, a double kind of metaphor, to just a circle. And a circle, when you actually dig into the nuts and bolts, mechanize the metaphor, you use the simplest shape and then sort of try to back project that understanding that's super intuitive on this level of simple shape into the more complex shape. Now, I assume this is probably easier for some people, even for me, sort of a bit of an inbuilt thing, like lucid dreaming, maybe. Skywork says computers do not have minds and only regurgitate data that has been fed to them. Well, not to be difficult, but it sort of depends what you mean by mind. Because if everything's a mind, then yeah, a computer has a mind in a way. But it's just a question of like how simple is that mind, how organized or how centralized, etc. So I think what the best thing is just to do a bunch of examples to see how it applies, because hyperbolic geometry is, I doubt most people have any mind experience with it, but we're basically looking at, I've got it on the screen right now, entangling a model for entangled dimensions. So this is a bit of a model for the Heisenberg principle in 3D. And they're almost functions, but we're connecting them so that we can model matter waveforms. The idea is that you have some sort of a sensor when you're doing these measurements, and you're aligning more. It's just a much faster way to get the eigen values and vectors of a system non-destructively. And the way mathematically we're treating things right now with the single zero in R3, when really there should be 3 zeros in R3 on some level. Like there's obviously more interpretation to it than that, but for it to mesh with physics, there's got to be more of a correspondence. And it's possible that a perfect correspondence is actually impossible because of how we work, because we are ground up, self-built pattern recognizers, so to speak. The patternless patterns just may be inconceivable. Oh yeah, that's right. It was your birthday, Doovid. Sorry, I forgot to say happy birthday. I'm bad at that. But
Well, my birthday was actually before last week. But,
oh, sorry. Yeah, it's sorry. I don't I have a hard time even telling my family happy birthday.
it doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, I mean, I liked your chart, and maybe if you look like that Buddhist video you were talking about and looking at things relationally or defining things in terms of their relation to other things.
The one
And
with
then-
the Chinese lady?
Yeah, and I forget the.
She was like, that was so dense. Wasn't like I had to re-listen to it 3 times, but she was very precise in what she said.
Yeah, I forget it's probably even Sanskrit terminology about the relational definitions.
You're talking about essence being Shobhava, the empty essence thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a Sanskrit term.
But it was also about relational definitions and things being defined not by definitions, but by relations to other things. And that could be an essence of emptiness, that things don't have definitions, they just have relations to other things. But if you put in the chart in objects and dichotomies and relations, it's useful. I mean,
And
I
then
call
you
it
can just say the
useful.
processes are eternal, or some processes are eternal. I think that's the
Yeah,
idea with the karma and a cycle being that process. So I don't know, but she didn't get to that. But I didn't really see the argument between empty essence and dependent arising, other than the trivial argument, which didn't seem compelling. Maybe that was what was being said, but I guess I don't really see how you get there. But it's unclear that these concepts necessarily even translate to some measure. I think we should steer clear of the empty essence notions, because I don't know that anybody's really going to be able to relate to that without actual meditation practice. But the relational thing, the dependent arising, I think most people could understand that just with an example of, well, what's consciousness? And then, well, it's awareness. And what's awareness? Well, it's consciousness. I mean, I think people you don't have to say, oh, nothing has any meaning and everything is process relational. You don't have to say that to have somebody understand that the self-reference problem exists in language when you have no way to get higher precision on what it is that you're both referring to.
Yeah, it'd be the nature of truth that if you want to put it doctrinally to a religion of emptiness, would say that definitions don't in fact exist. And you say, well, nothing exists, or that
Okay,
at best,
emptiness and nothing existing, that's not the same thing, just to be clear. I know it seems it's the same, but it's not.
yeah, and it doesn't have to be the same thing, but in the relation to what do things mean, or meaning not existing, and just relational identities that what does this concept mean? You can't necessarily give a definition and meaning. You could only give a reference to something else, and everything's circular in references, and in essence that's all there is these circular self-referencing.
We can't establish that that's all there is. We can establish that that
I said it's an
exists.
approach to truth.
It exists in that structure.
If you make an axiomatic
language is
system where you're
structured
going to try to have axioms and definitions, or if you have an approach to truth that you can't even establish axioms or definitions, and
Can
all
we
you
just
could
go
do
with
is
one at a time, please? Because I really wanted to actually acknowledge the first thing that you said there. It was a good question. I don't want to forget it.
why I didn't ask a question. I was just saying it's an approach to truth. And without definitions.
Oh yeah,
and
I wanted to say that dictionaries are
relational.
subject to this. Dictionaries are self-referential. That's all we've established. We haven't established, because you've said, oh, everything is
I
self-referential.
didn't
No.
establish. I said
We've only established that
with
dictionaries are.
Samuelson, I said it's an approach to truth. I wasn't trying to establish something. I'm saying that's already established. You're saying you could have a different approach. It's an approach to truth that doesn't use definitions and axioms, just relational referential identities. And it's like, if that's not your approach, that's fine. You have a different approach. You're saying it's an approach to truth.
No, I
If
think
you
what
wanna
I do
claim-
is
if you
more
want to claim,
that.
you want to pass
I just
judgment
take
and
what
say
I
it's right
do,
or wrong,
which
you
is
could
like
do that.
that.
I was just making the point. It's an approach to truth.
Sure,
It's
yeah.
even an approach to truth of a major school such as Buddhism.
Yeah, she called it an ontology. Is that the right word?
Well, ontology is the Greek term for the nature of truth, the nature of identity. So I'm saying ontology. I said it's the approach to truth, which is, I guess you could just say that's the ontology.
I have a hard time with that vernacular for some reason.
Well, I mean, I said that on Jai Devi. Almost all of our words for come from the Greek. Ontology, the branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of being. So I call it truth, or a set of concepts and categories in a subject area of domain that show the properties and the relations between them. But if you have an accepted ontology, and you take a alternative ontology like Buddhism that does that, or at least the school of Buddhism that doesn't even accept your axioms. It is a different ontology.
Well,
I
I was
called it an
thinking back
approach
to
to
what
the
the
truth.
lady said about how we're predisposed to a substance ontology, and trying to piece together that Nakajun would be trying to somehow counter that bias with the emptiness doctrines by saying, well, these essential facets of these identities are subject to change, but the process relational structure is more, I mean, it's actually unclear what it's even saying at that point, but it's interesting to kind of go into the ideas for sure. Trying to remember how this started. Yeah. So what do we want? A way to
I was
understand signal
making the
processing
comment on
without
your
consciousness.
diagram that it was similar to that video on Buddhism, that as opposed to, like the last week where you had a whole bunch of definitions, this one didn't have definitions. It just had the relations between concepts.
Yeah, this,
making
I
a
guess, is the
comparison to
process relational structure.
Yes, I was making the comparison to the Buddhist emptiness doctrine of just the self-referential relational identities between concepts.
Yeah, exactly. Good observation. That's what it's meant to be. And it's like a rake. And so you can take observations that are lined up with the rake, and the rake's a metaphor for non-interferential observations on a waveform. Or more accurately, minimally interferential. I mean, it obviously doesn't matter. You can interfere a lot with some systems, or not. There's some systems you don't want to interfere with basically at all, like consciousness. Why do you want to interfere with consciousness? Cause suffering potentially, but then some stuff is like a rock. It doesn't matter what you do to a rock. It's not going to hurt it. So, but the idea is to get scientific. Okay, let's go through a list of possible sources of bias when measurement is being made. So there's bias on the level of the machine. Whatever the machine is doing has to affect the system. It's unclear how, okay? Then there's an interpretation on the level of the computer, which is mathematical. There's double bias. So how do we get out of the double bias as quickly as possible? Well, we just need enough samples, the right kind of samples, to find the eigenvectors of the matter waveform. And the way to do that is through signal processing that is actually going to be consistent across quantum and, quote, classical. My understanding that the, quote, classical regime is actually a limit point, quote, big tent point of the quantum, which is really just a vague way of saying centralized individuated identity, which is just so vague that it could apply to anything. It's basically like saying chunking, no offense, but I obviously think you have more to say on chunking than just a word, or a word like decomposition, for example, it's like vague. So it's just a question of whose interpretation of quantum reality is going to be the one that sticks. Well, what does it mean for a theory to be good? It's kind of hard to know, because it has independent, or it has also is itself subject to dependent arising. So it's like, well, it's good when I understand it. Well, how do I know if I understand it? Well, I guess I'll know somehow. It's just it's the way it goes. So hopefully it works out, and I can do my example. I don't know how long these videos are going to take. Like, they always seem to take longer than I think. So, and I have several projects on the go. So all good, just working at my own pace on this stuff. But did you feel like this gave more insight into the possible utility of the system?
No, not really. I mean, I'd say you have to evaluate yourself to the process. I was making like a thesis. You have to.
Yeah, this is how you generate theses.
I mean, it's a useful diagram, like some use, but like no. I mean, if you want to establish something, you're gonna have to do it in the canonized way, and that's why I was saying like a thesis statement of an argument that you're putting forward. So this diagram is not necessarily like an argument you're putting forward. It's like, okay, well, things have relations, and I'm sharing it in a diagram, or words have definitions, but you're not actually forwarding an argument. And say it has a use, but like, no, it'll only. So I mean, you still have to vow yourself to the canonized process probably to make progress.
So I guess we can wrap it up for now and talk next week. Or you said we have to start later, or what's going on next weekend?
Yeah, next week it probably makes sense just to cancel next week, because I think Passover won't end till like 9 o'clock. So I will try to call. So let's cancel week in review for next week, and if we go to the if I could I guess the conference is already next week Monday, or is it Tuesday? Is April 18th? I'm trying to open up. Yeah, so it starts next week Monday. So the conference is Monday through Friday next week. So I guess if we end up going to the conference, maybe we'll stream even multiple times. If not, we'll just take a week off, and maybe the week after we'll, so the week after on the 24th, the Sunday after, we'll return week in review. So if I'm able to get in contact and they could answer the question of I guess I'll message you, but you just because we're talking now, and like if anyone's watching and is interested in tuning in to or I mean, I don't think anyone watching is actually going to attend the conference, but if they would actually watch the program that we do reviewing it, I'd probably do it on my channel. Maybe even a few days, like the next week Monday, or even a few days. Just because it's a lot of money. I mean, it's not. I mean, 320. A lot is relative, but $320. I want to find out if that includes one or two people. It looked like it may include two people. I was actually just going to go ahead and pay for it, and then I really wasn't sure if it includes two people, because I said, like, it asked for my information, and then it says you could give another name and email, and I just wasn't sure if it was going to, if that meant that if I signed up for it, if they would give the link, if they would also send a link to you, and otherwise that buy two separate tickets, it'd be $640. That's could possibly be worth it. But then I wanted to know, like, a simple, is it going to have a chat? Are they going to allow you? Are they going to allow us to like even try to talk to other people? Not even in terms of like self promoting or spamming. Just saying, like, is there going to be a chat to like communicate? And if not, it's probably from my perspective not worth it. Because they post the videos later. So if it's just paying to watch the videos live, it's probably not worth it. And so Jennifer was not successful in getting that information. And so I guess I was hoping you would make some sort of effort, because if I was going to pay for you.
Yeah, I made a huge effort. I called 3 times and sent 3 emails, and she didn't answer. So I mean, I don't know what else I can do. It might be because I don't have an American phone number. That's what I was thinking you could call, but I certainly did try. But
But
my
yeah, I mean, if they didn't
question
answer
went
you,
unanswered. She wouldn't answer my question. So
if
I
you
don't know
didn't
what
make
else I
it
can do.
clear, or if you emailed her and like for some reason you didn't phrase it like in a clear way, just like simple, does buying a ticket include links for one or two people?
I included you on the email. You can, It's very easy to verify. I put in bullet points. I put 1, ask the first question, 2, ask the second question. Didn't get a
You asked it
response.
very clearly that if you asked if one ticket includes 2 links with it.
I actually asked that twice. And the first time she responded, didn't acknowledge any of the questions and said, oh, yes, you have to sign up. And then I answered explaining we can't sign up until we've confirmed these things. And I haven't gotten any answer yet. And I doubt that I will. And I've called 3 times and left 2 messages. So I don't know what else I can really do without talking to the person.
Yeah, so tomorrow I'll look at the maybe I'll send an email and or you gave me the number and I'll try calling and I don't know if they answer, but yeah, I mean, I feel like if they can't answer that question, it's probably I'm gonna conclude that it's probably a waste of my money and not gonna sign up. So I mean, Jennifer tried and didn't get the answer to the question I wanted, which I thought was pretty reasonable. Like, I mean, God forbid I want to, I have to actually pay the $320, and I'm going to find out that it only includes me, and then I could pay an extra $320 if Jennifer is going to attend, and obviously, I'm not going to be able to like stream and cover it if I just pay and so like one link's not going to be enough, and then like $640, just so we could like stream and do a live coverage probably isn't worth it. Like that's what's like unless there's some sort of active chat where we could have some sort of interaction with the people, and they may not have that. So I'll try calling and find out. So I guess anyone watching, there'll probably be no way to verify. So I'll message Jennifer, and I'm not. It doesn't look like anyone here cares that anyone who's watching cares that much. But if I do end up signing up, if they do answer the questions and I do end up signing up,
I think it could be a fair bit of fun. But yeah, I mean, most of the fun in a conference is socializing. So for sure.
yeah. So well, I'm just saying that if I did sign up, we like I probably hope to do a stream, maybe probably Monday night, like after the first day, and maybe even a few nights, even every night. And so if we do end up signing up, so week in review, it's Passover, so don't won't be a week in review next week. If we do sign up for the conference, I'll probably stream a few times. Hopefully Jennifer will join on my channel reviewing the conference, but that's unclear. It's dependent on whether I could get these basic answers, and so unfortunately Jennifer wasn't able to get the answers, which is a bad sign, which makes it seem unlikely that I am going to sign up. Although maybe I'll call, and it's just because whatever reason she didn't respond.
I think it's honestly because I have a phone number that is coming up as, because I'm calling from Skype, and it's coming up as no caller, and they don't want to answer the phone because they figure it's spam. That's my guess. And as far as the email that didn't get answered, my guess is she couldn't be bothered to look it up. So if you call and you're like, hey, baby, I need some help. Get what I'm saying? Just turn on the charm.
No, I mean, no, I mean, there's no charm in it. It's a business. And the thing is just a simple question. Does one ticket include 2 or 1? And it's ambiguous from the call, and there's no charm involved. It's just a simple question that has a yes or no answer. No, I don't see it. It's just I just want a yes or no answer to these questions. There's no charm. There's no negotiating.
Yeah, turning on the charm never gets you what you want.
Well, I don't think I'm not going to get what I want. Like if it's saying either one ticket includes 2 links or not. And I doubt it's
you can
probably
get special treatment if you ask for it a lot of the time, especially if you're suave.
I mean, possibly, but no, I mean, doubt it. Like it's probably canonized, and like if one ticket comes with 2, it comes with 2.
You've just been talking about how disorganized the whole thing is. Now it's canonized in incontrovertible law. Which is it? I mean,
Well,
Don't
it could
take
be
a
a
more
crap
complex.
program. I mean, God forbid it probably is a crap program, and it probably is
Stuart
like that.
Hameroff is a workhorse, okay? That man has been working for 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably bad with money, and he's probably
What?
bad with organization, and like it could be like yeah, they hook people up and they're giving free, and it's poorly ran, and it's not professional, and who knows, maybe the Zoom's not even going to work right, and so like God forbid, um, I mean, just because they're scientists, like it does, like it doesn't mean they put together a good program. It doesn't mean that it's worth the money. And like, no, I mean, I'm not like I don't you don't shouldn't have to take
One
any
thing
charm.
is, yeah, but who cares? Okay,
It
so
could
now that
it could
we're
be a
reaching
simple
plum, this is
answer.
how the world works. I'm sorry. There's also a meditation session with Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's saying like generally when it comes to money, people are professional, and if they're not, uh,
I got tons of stuff extra by being suave and whatever. That happens.
well, I mean, maybe
I'm a
because you're
girl.
poor. Yeah, I'm saying like if you just pay, you just pay, and
But if you call up and you're like, hey, but obviously that only works one way.
yeah, no, I don't think so. I'm saying like if it's just not professional, it's not professional. If it's professional, um, but yeah, there's nothing to argue about. So I'll call, and if I can't get the answers that I'm trying to get, um, I won't go. And but if I do, then you could look forward to a stream or a few streams the week after next. As some sort of
If you want me to conference in on the call, I can do that.
to what?
Conference in on the call. The issue is a phone number that is a US number. If someone's calling from Detroit, cool, they'll probably answer.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're saying they have a number, and whatever reason you think they didn't pick up your number because like you don't have a
It
normal
comes up
phone.
as whatever Skype comes up as, which for a lot of people, they don't answer that because it doesn't come up like, I honestly don't know what it comes up as. I'm sure someone in the audience can say, but whatever.
You don't have like a regular phone or something that I want to ask you personal, whatever reason you failed to be able to reach them. I'll see if I could reach them.
That's
And
true.
if
I don't actually have a phone. Yeah, that is true.
okay, so whatever she failed to reach them, if I could reach them, and it could be
I can conference in on the call though. I can call, like if you want to do a 3-way call with them, that's fine.
no, I just want information. I just want two simple questions answered. Does one ticket come with two links, or do I have to buy two separate tickets?
You don't need to
And
repeat it. I know what the questions are. I understood them. I'm not the one who needs them repeated. Well, I guess now it's going on 4 times for that person whose name I won't say. But anyway, yeah, I'm sure we can. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see. I hope whatever is the best thing happens.
yeah, if it is what it is, I was, I'm usually cheap in general. Then I was like, okay, like we're doing the stream every week on consciousness,
Yeah. I mean,
so okay,
sometimes
like
it's worth spending money
I'll
on
invest a
valuable
little,
stuff. And then it's a
I'll
question of,
invest a
is
little
it
bit of
valuable?
money into it, and then then I was like, wow, it's a lot of money, like $300, and I got to buy two tickets, and then I saw, oh, maybe it's only one ticket includes two links, so okay, like so $320, not that much. Even I would even consider investing $640, but yeah, they like if they can't answer the questions, I'm gonna consider it a bad investment, or if I we'll see, and it could be that they're not set up like that, that they don't have it set up like that, and I'm not going to be able to reach them, and so I won't go, and so it is what it is. So have a good week. You could carry on rambling if you want, and I'll message you. I'll try calling tomorrow, and if I can't get through, I'll probably just give up and I'm not going to attend. So I'll call tomorrow, and if it doesn't look like I'm going to get through, I'll probably look like I just won't attend. But I'll let you know tomorrow.
Great. Sorry I couldn't get it to work. I can try again in the morning.
To call them?
I can try again. It's going on 3 times. I mean, I suppose I have the deniability to say the other 2 times it wasn't. Well, the time I left a message, I can't say that wasn't me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just figured that because I was the one who's going to be paying for you, that
I
you
get
do
it.
But I'm saying just because if you're saying you don't have a phone, and it's possible that the reason why they didn't answer you is because you're not calling from a regular phone or from a foreign, that I'll try myself, and but if you want to keep on trying, like if they, as I said, if they did answer those questions, I like, in at least in that I probably
Well,
would
I
sign up.
CC'd you on the latest correspondence. What I CC'd you on is the latest correspondence. So if she responds, I will let you know, but I doubt she will at this point.
Yeah, so it's looking like I'm probably not going to attend the conference, so it's unfortunate. So if that's the case, we'll see everyone in 2 weeks. So have a good week. Take
Thanks,
care.
you too. Hey, Anders. A real number. Anders says a real number can represent any graph, so our whole reality can be modeled as a single constant. A single constant, but does it have a finite representation? I wonder what an IRL stream would be like. Probably a lot of fun. I'm quite tall. I'm just under 5'10", but pretty much in that region of where men tend to fib about their height. So I'm always sort of accused being 6 feet. So we'll see. All right. So the question isn't whether we can describe an infinite thing, the cosmos, with an infinite quote, with a thing we've decided is infinite. It's can we get an understanding that is self-consistent without, okay, self-consistent, coherent, accurate. So there's a lot of problems with things. A lot of problems. A lot of limitations. Basically, what's the best model really depends on what it is you're even implementing the technology for. So main theme is keeping things undisturbed as long as possible. So measurement always involves the system becoming, okay, here's the issue. You have a system initially, you start to measure it. At what point does it become so deviated from what it was when you started that you can no longer trust that what you're measuring isn't an artifact of the measurement device? So, and so on and so on and so on, etc., etc., etc. You come to the conclusion of consciousness being the ground of observation, kind of obvious. And then look into consciousness as a technology itself. Anders says the real numbers are problematic because of infinities. So it's a question of utility. What do we need? So how far can we go before it is unmoored from meaning? And this is the issue, right? It's not about just having a conception of infinity. It's about being able to go through the recursion. 'Cause you never get the end of regression, right? You never get to the end of infinite regression. That's the whole point of it. But to see it from a far enough perspective to be like, okay, that's a dead end. It's obviously a dead end. To just like, if I'm looking for the meaning of life and I go and figure out all the laws of physics and I realize at some point, oh shit, it's just infinite recursion, or sorry, regression backwards. And there's no beginning. Okay, well, that doesn't tell me anything. It's unmoored from what I'm asking for. It's unfalsifiable because it's not inaccurate, but it's irrelevant to the current question. Yes, I'm sorry, I sound terrible. I am just having a lot of troubles with getting an actually functioning microphone, which I am still working on. And hopefully we'll have fixed soon. So anyway, I'll just wrap it up for now. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you again. I guess we're not having a show next week, but the week after, if not sooner. And I'll try to get something up in the meantime on this super fun system, matter wave for decompositional technology thing. Oh, Anders, why do you have to keep roping me back in? Like, honestly, okay, like how bad is it? Just on a scale from 1 to 10, just real quick, how terrible are we talking? And I apologize again for this being so bad. Um yeah, like I don't even know what Thompson's lamp paradox is. I find a lot of these paradoxes so annoying. I don't mind going into weird thought experiments, but I like to know where I'm going. If a person can't tell me where I'm going, I'm suspicious because it's like, okay, like getting set up for like to be tricked or something here. I got a conversation with some Hegelians and I appreciate their patience, but it was frankly incoherent. And I kept saying, like, how is this different from consciousness? How is this different from consciousness? And they couldn't say when they were absolutely certain that it was. And I was bringing up the point that if you can't establish anything other than a semantic difference on the conceptual level, and you want to distinguish based on something that has no substance to its definition, right? Because we already have the issue of a substance of definition. And none of those like topics were explored in any detail. It was just like how great it was and how right it was and how it couldn't be wrong. It's like that's uncompelling. All right, so philosophical puzzle based on infinities, right? Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of ideas about infinity. It's probably worth looking into just generally a meta-analysis of infinity because it's a, if okay, let's start again. Gravity, from an observational perspective, acts instantaneously. With the fastest speed of information as a signal is the speed of light. So we have a lot happening in the regime between infinity speed, gravity, and light speed. And essentially, we need a concept of infinity. But then to have access to, I don't want to say infinities, but or that it all necessarily reduces down to Russell's paradox, perhaps the essence of Russell's paradox is that self inclusion is an issue and negation on an axiomatic level is a uh, structurally self defeating. All right, so just to say that before we even go into this question here, just that like under some worldviews, you can't define infinity in a system. You have access to it basically once. So if you wanted to only work within R1 positive, you could say, well, there's only really one infinity there. That wouldn't even quite be true, but you could argue it. But definitely invoking arbitrary numbers of infinities when the concept of itself references a type of unboundedness, well, sure, you can manufacture what appear to be paradoxes. It's I don't want to say all the interpretations are correct, but it's the meaning behind the laws of logic that talk about excluded middle and so forth. Obviously, that is largely misinterpreted, but it does have some meaning. All right, here we go. So I haven't even got to this point here. Let's see here. Okay. See, I would really love it if people would, just keep the silly jokes, Let's try to be a channel we can all be proud of here. Consider a lamp with a toggle switch. Flicking the switch once turns it on and then off. Suppose there's a being who's able to perform the following task. Starting with the timer, he turns the lamp on. At the end of 1 minute, he turns it off. At the end of another half minute, he turns it on. And a quarter minute. Okay, so again, this is Zeno's paradox, right? We're looking at a series that is shrinking by 1/2 in size. Okay. Diagnosis here. Series going to half and so forth. Zeno's paradox. What's the substance of Zeno's paradox? It's not an accurate model. Because he never gets to the end, it's not an accurate model. See how that works? If he did get to the end, that wouldn't say it was an accurate model. But because he doesn't, and we know in reality that he does, somewhere that model doesn't line up to reality. Now, I don't know if that's something everybody takes from it, but it's certainly how I read it. And the sum of this infinite series. So it's like you're starting off the problem with something impossible because it can't be an infinite series. Because when you run up against doing that process at what amounts to the speed of light, you're interfering with the light you're creating. You're moving faster than the light that's coming out of the lamp. Okay. So it's like, obviously, this is, it's all down to like, well, how do we understand infinity? There you go. Which, as it turns out, is not really the best place to start. So we can keep infinity on the back burner, but there's a conceptual problem with infinity. And I've been looking into it. There's sort of a choppy infinity, like the natural numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's R. So we've got Aleph naught, Aleph 1, standard conceptions of what are essentially numerical infinities. And then you have space-temporal, matter, massive infinity. That's the universe, the cosmos, all that exists. That's not the same infinity. So we are already now we're at 3. And finally, we have something infinite as something that is unbounded. Now, it's possible to have an unbounded finite thing. It's impossible to have a bounded permanent thing. And that's the whole idea, and why these systems that sort of seem to say nothing can actually work is because they're mechanistically true. So I don't know if they actually have an answer to this, but it's sort of like, well, how do you answer a paradox? I guess, in my experience of resolving paradoxes, they lead into their own problems. So it's always, not always, but almost always about where the rubber hits the road with regards to the hard problem of consciousness. If everything is consciousness, then yeah, once that hard problem is solved, you're kind of like, all right, you're pretty good. Yeah, so Zeno paradox is Zeno's machine. Essentially, it's a thought experiment, and it can be useful when learning to, quote, think like a computer for implementing your vision of a particular coding language. So that was one of the big motivations for what I did here. Quantum computing, largely historically, has been operator input controlled to such an extent that the people who were the best quantum computer makers were like that one guy, right? Not saying it's just the one person, but I wouldn't necessarily say a perfect analogy is the 3D printer, but it's a new technology and there is a fair amount of operator input control. It's a bit the same with quantum computers. Yeah, you can standardize the function of a quantum computer, but the calibration process potentially can proceed in a quote infinite direction, not infinitely large, but doesn't end if you can continually zero in on meaningful, novel axes of information. Okay, so Anders says it can't be done. It's not really a paradox, just an impossibility. Yeah, so it's just worth looking, maybe worth looking into these things to do to maybe teach particular lessons. Like, what lessons does this show? Well, that language may have a very high degree of redundancy. And by may, I mean does. It's how I can generate examples of, well, what's consciousness? Oh, well, it's awareness. Well, what's awareness? Well, it's knowing about something. Okay, well, what's knowing something? It's being intelligent. It's like you're eventually, you're eventually just coming back to a bunch of words that probably allude to basically the same thing, but at a certain point, you look at where these things go, and it's a bit like broken telephone, or that game when you're a kid where you have a word or word combination that you whisper to someone and they say to the next kid and goes on and on. And the idea is that, well, do you get the right answer? Probably not. Yeah. So what does it mean that one infinity is larger than the other? It means that conceptually we have access to 4 infinities that are different to a degree. Now, nothing is absolutely different because of the self-reference problem, but also because of the self-reference problem, there are degrees of self-reference in systems. And that's really where a lot of the meaning is physically happening. But as I was saying before, because meaning is grafted through emotional triggers, it's largely subconscious, and it's just most of the compute quote unquote quote unquote power of your mind is going towards generating an illusion of certainty with regards to definitions, not just definitions, but that is a big part of it. It all ultimately stems from the perception of a single finite self. Okay, so people say that, and Varand H words it and feels like it's wrong. Well, it's, should we have one definition for one word? Should we have 4 definitions for one word? Should we allow incompatible definitions for words? Those are all like different questions. So it's not just about feelings. Feelings are part of it. Impressions and feelings, and that's all connected, because you don't want something like wildly against your instincts that you're constantly going to be having to repeat like some sort of doll on wind up, because it's just so damn uncompelling that you're constantly having to like say it to like, oh, it's got to be right. I'm not saying that there ought to be multiple definitions of infinity. At this point, it makes a lot of sense to distinguish concepts to some measure, to a meaningful extent, to a high extent, to counteract the extreme bulkiness of language. We have no way to know right now the degree of redundancy of language the matter fork gives us away in. Because if everything in our language can be expressed meaningfully in matter fork, not just someone who already knows how to use it as is that, but someone who doesn't know how to use it with a predetermined method can follow it and get the meaning through direct experience. So to come back to this, just to qualify what I was saying about infinity, it's like, no, I'm not like white knighting for infinity as a concept that we need a bunch of different infinity concepts. We need a certain number, but we need to start with understanding that infinity is way harder to conceive of than 0. 0 is pretty much impossible to conceive of. And there is like a structural problem with 0 and the valueless value thing. It's not always an issue, but when it is and it's not taken into account, it's really problematic, because it's tantamount to a bias, an unaccounted for signal bias error, which is instantiated every time you plot a point. Yeah, so in my worldview, there's obviously 1 over 0 and 2 over 0. Those aren't even infinity. So to get from 1 over 0 equals infinity, that requires you to approximate those numbers as a function, right? So that's not what I'm talking about. We've got aleph naught, aleph 1, the cosmic infinity, the actual infinite infinity, biggest thing can establish conceptually as just everything that exists. Those are all different on at least a level of the symbol associated with it. And there's another one. Because infinite means without a finish, it doesn't finish. Something that is finite and doesn't have a boundary is also infinite. So we have a fourth definition now, which is clearly not any of the first three. So those concepts ought to be separate. Should they all be the same word? Well, yeah. Point being, getting at here is let's qualify infinity, but we don't want to just qualify it to the point where it's like, oh, well, I woke up in a bad mood this morning, so I invented another infinity. It's like, no, we don't want the printer of axioms of anything. We don't want an infinity printer to get turned on. We don't want the axioms printer to get turned on. We don't want any of that because, like, the idea in logic about a truth explosion, why is that a problem? Because the power of a logic system, an inferential, particular implementation of an inferential system, is that it can distinguish at least two states. In the case of the logic, would be true and false, right? Yeah, so Varan says, definitions, man, definitions. Well, that's part of it. Definitions is literally a starting point. Definitions can show us a lot of things, but then we need a justification for definitions. And just the complexity of this system here, you see, like, well, how can we possibly justify all this? Well, with knowledge, with integral knowledge, because it's obviously representing integral knowledge and coming from a large degree of intuitive understanding of how complex something ought to be. You can encode that into your feelings to pattern recognize it. I know that because I did it. All right, so Anders says Hilbert's Infinite Hotel is interesting, but I discovered a problem with it, which is how to fill the entire hotel with guests in the first place. This is an awesome, interesting venue of investigations, like actually solving these. We're maybe not going to solve every paradox, but making meaningful incursions into a recursion, or sorry, a sequence of steps that could conceivably solve the problem. What we're looking for is sort of a Russian dolls thing, where you're always going into another Russian doll, but at each like opening of the doll, you want non-trivial information. That's the whole point, is to get that good information, separate the useful signal from the noise as quickly as possible. So we're looking at a quick convergence. And so the degree to which one understands this interrelation is the degree to which one can use the knobs essentially on a quantum computer. Because a quantum computer, a simple one, is only going to have a few dimensions of penetration that it has variability in. But as you get more and more complicated, you can go into arbitrary many different, quote, dimensions, because we're in an energetic soup, right? How do we validate that? Well, mind creates structures in 11D. Why is that valid? Well, our bodies exist on multiple orders of magnitude, and 3 plus 1 is a per order of magnitude deal. So yeah, in my system, like 1 over 0, that's not an infinity. You could say, like, well, it would be qualified. You say, well, if I want to approximate 1 over 0, well, okay, I'll just do like this graph, and then I'll sub in values that are closer to 0, and I'll approach 0 from the positive and from the negative, blah, blah, blah. And I'll see, what the multi-level convergence that I get is, and so on and so forth. But that infinity would exist relative to the approximation of the system modeling it. So it would either be alpha naught or alpha 1. That's really all that there is. And I don't see the need to remove R as a concept because it may actually help certain forms of visualization to, because like what's the power of R in my view anyway is infinite precision. You can keep zooming in and in and in and in and in, and you never losing any precision. Now, how to get an intuition for this is the design of the real number line. For every two sequential rationals, you have an irrational between them, and basically you can generate an arbitrary number of rationals by just dividing by 2. So I got two numbers and going to have an irrational between them. Oh, look, I just divide that by 2 again. Okay, I got new numbers, new number between them. I can keep going on that process. There's no end to that process. So I don't know if that clears it up at all, Varand, or if you agree with me or what, but I'm not like wedded to any one interpretation. I'm just saying that when we have multiple words, okay, when the same word refers to potentially multiple concepts, that's a problem. There's a lot of problems in language. And by starting with just the matter fork, I'm hoping we'll get one class problems as self-evident, solve them, practically, which is going to be understanding where's meaningful operator input control come in the quantum computer, and then so on and so forth. So yeah, hopefully that is something. Hopefully that is interesting for people. Cantor has alpha naught as the smallest infinity, which Anders finds suspicious. Well, in the case of my system, there'd be a distinction between a spatial and a linear infinity because we're working within the confines of the measurement limit. So everything is measurement limit arising because that's like the starting point. So I guess smallest is like, well, in a way, any line is smaller than a volume. But in a way, any line is bigger than, or any infinite line is bigger than a finite volume in a way. So this is another thing that we can't go too far into concepts if there's possibility of any confusion of interpretation along the way, because it's going to make it so that there's no way to verify you won't be able to track the meaning, basically. And I'm sorry you didn't understand any of that, Varand. I'm always working on making it more clear, but I understand a lot of the stuff is abstract. Most people aren't used to thinking in an integral manner. But it does work, and it does come with time, and it does lead to very quick assimilation, easy learning. There's definitely a learning curve, but once you've gotten through at least one leg of it, you can directly say, oh, you can directly through perception validate the tech. So if people are actually curious, I would say don't start with this tech unless you're actually legit interested in like advanced physics. Start with any tech and then just validate it, see through your own experience if it's for you. Which, these things have been validated. And part of the doctrine is the step of self-validation, self-study. It's absolutely necessary. Yes, Anders. So see how there's two possible definitions here. So we got to be able to track these. If you can't track the whole combo, start making notes. I make notes all the time. It really helps because these ideas do get sort of almost too big for conception at some point because the causal chains get super long. That's the whole point of, not the whole point, but part of philosophy is to see through firsthand experience why we truncate these causal things with models, even though they're not 100% accurate, whatever that means, because infinite regress is inconceivable to a finite being. So it was back to the question of well, the smallest infinity is naturals. That's based on a particular definition of smallest. So if I define smallest as small as physical size, then the physically unbounded system is the smallest infinity. But in terms of the mass of a line that has no volume, there's no possibility to have mass without 3 dimensions is sort of the, main point here. The answer changes depending on what our definition of infinity is. So these problems all have to be addressed at once, and the process of addressing them over and over, that contemplation, and builds the virtues of focus and imagination and everything else that's integral to the path of learning. Thanks for watching the show, everyone. Really appreciate those who came and stuck it out to the end. See you